You get me low, but I'm not dysfunctional.
Good evening, it's Tuesday, September 12th, 2017. This is day 2 of a 3-day budget study session for Littleton City Council. Each of the evenings is between 6 and 9 generally. Tonight we're going to be starting now at 6. We have a schedule that if we were to be following the schedule, we might possibly be done between 8:30 and 9 tonight, but we're going to try to aim for 9 o'clock as our quitting time as we did last night. So this is day 2. We're working on policy questions. There's going to be 14 of them that are going to be up for discussion tonight. Remember, we have one carried over from last night, and it's mentioned in the handouts that we have, and there's 14 other policies, or 13 other policy questions. So we have more than a handful of times that we're going to have to make sure we get consensus to direct staff to go forward with it or not. This brings us to the schedule. Public Works is the first of the presenters.
Actually, Fire.
I'm sorry, Fire is first of the presenters. Yes, it is. And we're going to turn it over to the City Manager to kick it off, and we'll be starting with Fire and then Public Works.
Well, let's see. I think I don't really have any more detail here to add as a preface to this. We hope to cover community developments, library, museum, open space, and some other citywide issues here for the evening. And then again for tomorrow, we hope to talk about maybe anything that's left over from tonight, some of our unfunded priorities, talk a little bit about the general fund operations that some of the department directors wanted to propose, but again, they're unfunded. And there's a couple that are pretty notable in there that relate to the fire department. We had a fire partners meeting here today, and the partners made it very clear that they want the city to pursue those two issues here. And they feel that one in particular is part of a contract responsibility. But we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that tomorrow night, and I'll share with you my approach for how we might manage some of that. And then we'll also talk about the unfunded capital needs. We've touched on that here a little bit already, but I'm hoping to have a little more in-depth conversation about some of that detail. And finally, then we're going to talk a little bit about funding options, revenue issues that we might want to consider here for the future, and I'll talk a little bit about a schedule, about how I would suggest we approach that. And then finally, we have some proposed fee increases here that relate to kind of the development process. We had a paper we handed out last night, hoping that council will have an opportunity to kind of look that over here for our meeting tomorrow night. So without any further questions, I think I'll turn it over to Chief Armstrong, and we'll dive right into the budget for the fire department.
Good evening, council. My goal tonight is to try to get in and out faster than Chief Steve, which generally isn't a problem, but last night he turned the tables on me a little bit. So
I was real disappointed when I watched it today.
he left me turned over a new leaf. He's not even here to enjoy it. So
Then he's fair game.
yeah, tonight I have one policy question and some budget highlights for you. I guess before we get started, it's probably important for me to note that our operating budget, our proposed operating budget for 2018 is based on our existing contract with our fire partners. It does exclude revenue for the dispatch side from Cuttingham Fire, and the 2018 proposed budget actually comes in just over $500,000 under our 2017 budget. So with that, we'll get into the first policy question, which is question number 5, and it asks if council supports funding of $225,000 of non-recurring fire capital projects. Station 12 structural repairs is one of the projects that Public Works is going to be embarking on. The cost comes in at $175,000. It's on page 132 and 134. The other is the extrication equipment for $50,000 on page 132 and 135. And it's offsetting revenue of $35,000, meaning that $50,000 for equipment is split 3 ways between our fire partners. The purpose of the equipment is, as you know, when we opened Station 19, we tried to do it without a lot of capital investment. We used the impact fees to purchase, and build the station. We took delivery of a fire truck from Lockheed as part of our contract. And what we need to do is purchase some extrication equipment for that station and that apparatus so that the truck is equipped and meets the same standards as the other apparatus in our.
And they're like hand tools?
Those are the hydraulic tools, the jaws of life, if you will, that we use to work on auto accidents. So they're fairly expensive pieces of equipment. This is one set that costs $50,000. But they'll generally last anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So we do get quite a long life span out of it. The structural repairs, I'll try to explain it the best I can. If you have more questions, Keith is here. Over here. Keith is here, and he can get into some more detail. But the concrete apron out in front of Station 12, we're having some issues with, specifically after it snows and it rains. There's water getting underneath the slab, and we have a huge slab of concrete that is moving out in front of the station. In part of our assessment to try to identify the cause, what we found was that as they did some work several years ago, I guess, to try to correct the problem, and they attached some pipes underneath the slab to our drains from our roof. and it's supposed to divert the water away, and they used perforated pipe. So the water is escaping through the pipe underneath the slab, and it's compromising the integrity of the slab where our fire trucks drive. And obviously, there's a lot of weight on those trucks. So it's a fairly expensive capital improvement to get corrected. I don't know, Keith, if you have anything you need to add, if that's a pretty good executive summary of that. But it's been a problem for us. We want to address it, so that's one of the large capital items that would be borne by the city by itself because it is our fire station. So that's a little background.
In 2013, we spent 115 grand on concrete repair for Station 12. Is that the project you were talking about where they put the perforated pipe underneath?
I believe so. That was before my time, and I don't have the history, but it did not work.
So,
Whose fault?
well, that's one question, and how are we going to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because
And is there a warranty?
yeah, spending money over and over for the same thing.
Keith Reeser, Acting Public Works Director. We had a structural team come in, structural engineering team here locally come in and review the situation out there. The previous project, there's several contributing factors along the way here. The soils out there, you got some naturalized movement in those. It looks like in several projects in the past, when they were constructed, they didn't do a great deal of soil remediation along the way to stiffen up the soils. So you've got some naturalized movement. This particular site has some drainage issues because you've got the roadway and it sits on a graded site that moves directly to storm drainage and the canal behind it. So you've got some contributing factors there. It looks to me like in the structural review, the previous work that took place was really, to some extent, a limited remedy to try and offset the drainage issues as opposed to going in there, pulling up the slabs, redoing the soils out front and doing it right. It looks like some of that is probably what occurred. So the situation we have now is that you've got large slabs out there that are undermined, especially on a moisture side, and putting 60,000-pound trucks on them. And once you start to get movement, there's not a lot you can do there. Additionally, in the backside of the site, there's some significant drainage issues which weren't addressed at all the first time back in the car parking area and then down in that area. So this includes some interior structural work, the slabs out front. We're going to deal with some landscaping and some drainage issues around the side of the station to shed water away from the structure in over the long haul. So it should address some of those factors as well. I can't say why they made that choice in the past. And my guess is, looking at the budget and looking at the remedy, is they said, we probably got about this much money, and we're going to try and figure something out to get the water away from the building and the slab.
And how long is your warranty?
Well, it depends on who the contractor is. So I'm a big fan of smaller slabs with more flexibility. We talked about this at other stations recently. So.
When you say smaller slab, what are you talking about?
Like if you go out there right now, the concrete slab that's in the driveway, the porch slab's probably, most of them are almost as big as this table area. And so what happens is, if you think about it, it starts to move, and the soil starts to move, and maybe you get a little bit grade change in it, and you put if you put a car on it, that doesn't have that much impact, but you put a 60,000-pound piece of apparatus on it, that little corner that might be up, maybe you got a little void under it, that's just enough to start to move it more, maybe break the corners.
But I mean, we have that train long engine there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have a big engine out there.
Mm-hmm.
So is whatever we're talking about going to accommodate maneuvering that engine all kinds of ways there?
Yeah, the replacements, what we've talked about with the design engineer is the construction would include a stiffer mix in essence with some more rebar in it, as well as some smaller cuts. So your expansion joints are, instead of a slab of this size, it'll probably be half or a third, so that you have more room for it to move without larger damage to the structure itself. So it gives you a little bit more pocket flexibility in it to move. I'm trying to think of an apt comparison off the top of my head, but I really can't.
Yeah, the area itself will be the
Yeah, it'd
same
be the
size.
same.
It'll just be poured in smaller sections, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so it's important, and it's a tight turning radius. You're always going to have a lot of pressure on the tires. It's like when you see a bus stop, for example, and there's a bus stop with asphalt, a bus stop with concrete, and you see that shoving. And those forces are still there, even on the concrete. And if those slabs are moving, those forces still have to go somewhere.
So if it's poured in smaller sections, what's between the sections?
Well, it's the same thing. It's just smaller. You still have the same area covered. Instead of
No, but I mean...
Expansion joints.
Yeah, thank you.
She's talking about the joints.
Yeah, they're still butted up against each other. Instead of one big slab like this, you'd have an expansion joint down the center and an expansion joint that way. So instead of one big one, you just have 4 small ones in the same area.
Yeah, this would be designed by basically a structural engineer, and having designed reinforced concrete pavement, I think one of the things Keith's trying to touch on is that the expansion joints, have to look at carefully because you don't want them tipping and displacing differently. So you may have to use smooth rebar, in essence, to allow the slab to move around, but not vertically. And so, this is, when you have a piece of equipment like we're talking about, it's quite a structural design for a slab of this magnitude.
Takes some good engineering. Definitely do that for sure.
So does council have any additional questions? Because that is policy question number 5. It's to support funding the $225,000 of non-recurring fire capital projects for those 2 projects, the replacement of the extraction equipment out at 19 and then the concrete that we're talking about.
So I do have, go ahead. I have a B question.
You have a what?
Item B.
Question on item B.
I'm a beekeeper, so. Be quiet.
Thank you.
Don't be concerned.
Spelling test.
Okay.
So we have
Be serious.
50 grand for extraction equipment because the equipment that's in our year-old station is older than the station. I think you said you took it out of reserve to put it in the... So what other equipment what I'm looking for is a cost of what it costs to build and fill the station. So what other equipment do we have that's in the station that's going to come up in the next year or so? And then the second part is actually for Tiffany. So we've got the engine that we took from Martin and put in there. So how much longer is that good for?
Well, that apparatus was actually in fairly good shape, so what we're doing is just sticking to our 5-year apparatus replacement plan at this point. So that truck, through attrition, would get shuffled through based on mileage, hours, maintenance costs, things like that, into reserve status, and then we replace apparatus. So we kind of shuffle them around. It's really hard to say when that would be needed to be done. Certainly, the extrication equipment we could have purchased at the time that we opened the station, but we didn't really take that into consideration at the time. We have one reserve set of extrication equipment that we're currently using. The problem is if I have a set that goes out of service for repair, I don't have another one to put back on the truck. So we have a standard in terms of equipment, and generally I think we did about 99% of what we needed to get that station up and running. It's been operational for a year now. And
So
this
the
is really the
ambulance-
first thing we've seen.
The ambulance that we put in there, is there just an engine or is there also an ambulance?
Just an engine.
Okay. So the second part is for Tiffany. I was under the impression that the construction costs were 2.6 million on that, but I don't see that in the capital. I see-
Okay.
Can you explain that to me?
Sure.
Or am I looking at the wrong line?
Well, unfortunately, there's several lines that you have to look at in different
Okay.
lines. So the fire station costs were spread amongst 5 funds. A few of the impact fee funds and the capital projects fund. And so
So the expenditures were spread among all the funds or just
The costs were allocated to different funds because we can use impact fees
Okay.
to help fund the building of the fire
So
station.
instead of transferring everything into the capital projects fund,
We paid for it out of
out
each
of the different
individual.
funds? Okay,
Right.
so give me the line items.
Okay, so
Or you can email them to me if you want.
I have them if you want me to
Okay.
share.
Sure, please.
So the ones for the construction, if you're looking in Fund 34, the description is going to be, I believe, Station 19. Fire station, I think it's. Fire station, right.
Yeah, just the numbers.
Okay.
Account number.
Sure. So 34-221-7115.
221175, okay.
34-221-7821.
Okay.
And if you go to the impact fees, I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but 2171-7821,
2171721.
20-171-7821,
7821. Okay.
22-171-7821, and 24-171-7821.
721.
7821.
7821.
Yeah, I try to keep the same
So
accounting
7821
schedule.
on all four of them?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Right,
And then
thank
the
you.
total of those 4 line items, 5 line items, is about 2.6 million, I believe.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's going to be primarily the capital piece of it. There's a few other line items that may have some smaller equipment in them.
Yeah, and I see you have another line item, which I assume is engineering costs or something that says non-capital.
Right.
I just had a question on the apron again, because I'm a little bit hung up on that. It doesn't seem like it would be that much different than an airport runway. I mean, certainly an airplane weighs a lot more than a fire truck. Are we making sure that we get engineering involved so that we aren't back in this boat again?
No, even in your
Wait.
original, in a normal design, for example, take the new Fire Station 19. You know, as part of that design package, you're going to have a structural engineer. In that particular site, you had some challenging soil, so you definitely had to have a structural engineer involved. Having done runway projects, though, actually, in my career, they are way more a lot of concrete, but it's the same issue. So what you do in a project like this is you know, your structural engineer is going to look at your loads, going to look at your soils. They're going to design something as well as something that's got some extra capacity in it. You know, if you know you're going to put a 60,000 pound fire apparatus or trash truck on it regularly, they're gonna structurally design that for 80,000 pounds, or similarly, like when I don't tell everybody this, but when you put a speed limit sign, there's a little more speed capacity in the road. I know none of you speed, so you wouldn't know that, but we do the same thing when we engineer road design too. So.
But obviously, when they did this originally, they thought they were going there. So we had a structural engineer who screwed up, or
construction installed.
Or construction was screwed up.
That's also true, but those are all possibilities. There's also the possibility that, and I've seen, having built lots of things, and Mark can speak to this, having built lots of things as well, is that, sometimes you get something built and site conditions change. That's very common here in the Front Range. I've done a lot of projects with buildings where, you do the best you can, but you're still going to end up with, structural movements in the soils. With the soils we have here in Colorado, you do your best, and sometimes those things happen. Or, Mother Nature can help you out sometimes too.
Okay.
So we're going to do I can assure you that we've already got a structural engineer involved in the project as part of the initial assessment, and also the design work that will proceed with this will not only be done by them, but we'll have a peer review in the process as well.
Okay. That station just isn't that old, those aprons, and it's very disappointing to be in this position. So
I agree with that.
I'm trusting you.
Thank you. We'll
Again,
do our
his
best.
position again.
Yeah.
Because it's 13 years old now.
Is it? Yeah, it's not that old.
Okay, so to the question of policy, go ahead.
I have one just for the chief on the equipment then. So that's going to be shared though amongst all of the stations, the equipment.
The extrication equipment?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, technically what we do is we'll take the reserve out, put it back in reserve so that we have an extra set in case we have a malfunction, breakdown, or repair that needs to be done. But the equipment can be put anywhere. It's split 3 ways between the partners. So I think it's about a $35,000 cost to the city for the $50,000 piece of equipment.
So then when needed, if somebody calls that we're going to need extraction equipment and somebody runs it over.
No, it stays on the apparatus. We actually have a set on each piece of apparatus. This particular station is using an old reserve set.
Oh, gotcha.
So we need to purchase a new set for that truck, but they can respond anywhere.
The cost is shared, but the equipment stays primarily at 19.
That's
Okay,
the
gotcha.
intent, yes.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, the cost of the equipment is split 40-30-30 percentage-wise in accordance with the contract.
Gotcha, thank you.
Peggy?
What happened to the old one?
We
Sell
didn't,
that or?
we didn't have, what happens to an old one? The old one,
So there is no old one?
the old one's being used, but it's really a reserve. We'll use it as long as we can until it needs to be replaced. I think the one that we currently have in service is somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 13 years old. Technology changes, the equipment changes, so we certainly need to keep up with that, but being an expensive piece of equipment, we try to get as much life out of it as we can.
So we're ready to look around the room, and if there's any objections, I guess, would you let me know that there's an objection to moving this policy question forward?
Go for it.
That's no problem. Okay, Chief, move on.
Thank you. So the first budget highlight is reallocation of $381,420 in personnel expenses to the EMT fund, as primary responsibilities have transitioned into medical transport. The accounting change has no impact to the number of FTEs in the department. It's just a transfer of money from one fund to another. And the reason being is, and I'll just touch on it and then let Tiffany put her financial expertise to it. We have an enterprise fund that requires us to be utilized in a certain fashion. As part of our master plan, we have added 3 extra peak hour medic units into service to handle the EMS call volume. And because of that, we had to take a percentage of the salaries of the personnel that are staffed on those medical units and pay their salaries out of the emergency transport fund because it's a Tabor enterprise. So finance felt that that was a more appropriate use in keeping with the definitions in terms of the Tabor requirements, and that's why this transfer is being recommended.
Sorry.
So remind me, the salaries in the EMT fund are added to the salaries that appear in the fire department fund account in the general fund to get the total salaries paid, correct?
Not in the general fund. So the salaries that are for the EMT fund are actually in the EMT fund,
Okay.
separate.
Yes.
They're held separate from the general
Yes.
fund. And so that's why you saw a reduction in the general fund and then an increase in the EMT fund.
So, but if we're trying to get the total salary costs,
You would have to include the salary cost from the EMT.
we'd have to sum those two together.
Yes.
And right now, the salaries that are in the EMT fund are all the paramedics, or most of the paramedics, or a percentage of the paramedics, or?
Right. We have an internal allocation that we use for that. And primarily it includes, I believe, 32 personnel, but they're allocated different percentages based on what their job duties are.
Okay.
And we just felt it important to kind of look at that and make sure that we're accounting for everything, especially with the change in the addition of the medic unit.
So it's 32 heads, but it's different percentages of salaries.
Right. Yeah. And then I will just add, because we did kind of talk about this in a prior conversation, we ended up doing a 5-year projection for the EMT fund because we realized that the salaries are increasing quite a bit because of this change. So I just want to let you, council, know that we're going to continue to look at that EMT fund as far as the revenues, because if we get to a point, which may happen in the next few years or so, if we get to a point where the revenues are not enough to meet the expense or match the expenses, then we're going to have a conversation about that.
challenge with the fund is salaries and benefits and
Right.
medical supplies and costs continue to rise, and we're subject to the government's reimbursement policies for Medicare and Medicaid, as well as private industry reimbursements on our transport. So the two numbers are going in opposite directions. So we have to look at a way to make sure we can stay on top of that.
We are seeing some increases in the revenues. We're just seeing a change in the payer class.
All right, so the second budget highlight is as a result of the discontinued contract with Cunningham Fire Protection District for dispatch services, there's an increase to the general fund for the city's share of the cost related to the communication center of $62,570, which is on page 128. Continue. Questions? We're going to take questions as we go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Since Cunningham is going away, the workload for Cunningham, which is a 25% reduction, and that was part of the justification, or most of the justification for adding the 1.5 FTE in the 2017 budget. Wouldn't we see a reduction in FTE to take into account the smaller workload?
In theory, you would think that that would be true, but we operate currently with 2 dispatchers on duty at all times, which means one dispatcher is answering the phone and another dispatcher is dispatching trucks. Whether we dispatch 500 calls or 10,000 calls, we cannot go below those 2 dispatchers. Our goal is to try to get to 3 dispatchers. Our dispatchers currently take their lunch break at their console while they're working. We do not give them a 30-minute lunch break because we can't leave one dispatcher in the room by themselves to answer phone and dispatch calls. It's not safe. My recommendation is we need to continue moving to the 3 dispatchers, at least during our peak hours, which are 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week, so that not only do we have some backup, I mean, if we have a structure fire, we get inundated with 911 calls, and our 2 dispatchers are very busy. And there are other calls coming in at the same time. So while we do have a decrease in call volume, the way we're currently set up, it does not allow us to operate with a lower staffing level.
So if we have 2 on each shift and we have 3 shifts, that's 6 dispatchers. And then assume we have to have some extra for sick and vacation. But that shouldn't get to 13, should it?
Well, we're currently budgeted for 13.5. One of those is our communication supervisor who does not dispatch. He manages the communication center. We have a deputy communication supervisor whose workload is not supposed to be dispatching, but she does full time. That only leaves us 11 and a half for 6 positions. When you think about a full-time employee works 2,080 hours a year. They get 40 hours of floating holiday. They get a couple weeks of vacation. They get sick time. Sometimes they're out on bereavement. I just had an employee out for a couple months on FMLA. We have to be able to, account for that. We're a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day operation, so it requires more than your normal staffing to account for that. So right now, we're using a lot of our existing staff to fill vacant positions on overtime. If you'll remember, in 2016, I had 7 dispatchers work 3,000 hours of overtime to keep this center operational, to fill vacant positions as well as the vacations that they're entitled to. So my recommendation is that 3 should be our goal and our standard. I believe, I don't want to speak for PD, but I believe that's the level that they run at. And I would suggest that we look at least that same level for fire and EMS.
Did you get the ones that we approved from last year?
We hired 4 personnel that are in training. We're still 1.5 short. We exhausted the list that we currently had in the process. So the 4 have been on since July. It was right after our second reading. Yes. We hired them, and they're still in training, and they're expected to be cut loose at the end of next month.
Excellent. So, and we don't have a freeze on anymore?
No. No. As soon as council voted on the second reading, we hired the 4 immediately. In fact, we offered full-time positions to our part-timers. They all turned it down because we wanted to expedite it. We didn't need to train them. That was the first thought. We went that path, and then we hired the 4 and put them on right away. So, yeah. Continue? All right, so we have lease payments for radio replacement in 2016. The lease payments for the radio replacement, I believe that was the upgrade that PD and Fire did for the Motorola
And Public Works.
and Public Works radios. They were at their end of life, so we were required to buy new radios. And then we have purchase of the platform truck, our lease payment of $187,480. Is that a payment? That's a total for the year, right? We'll continue into 2018. That's on page 132. Any questions on those? Continue. Okay. We have the annual replacement of mobile data terminals. That's primarily an IS project. We are on a constant replacement of our fleet for mobile data terminals. That's where our dispatch information and our routing information comes to our firefighters. Gives them the nature of the call and the information that they use for all the incidents that they run on. That includes laptops and the record management system and everything. And then the other are just some really ongoing capital projects that we've been trying to embark on. The thermal imaging cameras, I came in about 2 years ago. We purchased a few of them. I think we've been doing about 4 a year. And our goal is to put one of those types of equipment on every piece of apparatus. I believe we're down, this is about the last set we need. And then we get about 7-8 years out of them, and we'll start looking at a replacement program for those. The Lucas machine is the CPR machine. If you remember a couple of years ago, we transitioned from one machine to another. We showed you a little bit of a video. Those 3 medic units that we put on the road, the peak hour medic units, do not have these pieces of equipment on them. So we want to purchase those to, again, get our medic units up to standard. And then the cots are the same thing. We're using reserve cots in those medic units as opposed to new ones, so we don't have any spares, if you will, to put in service if one of them breaks down.
You're talking the gurney type stuff?
That's correct, stretchers, yes. And the last thing is the replacement of the Opticoms. As you know, we have signaling. We were able to change the signals at major intersections. We always budget this $10,000 in the event we have a malfunction of one of those pieces of equipment. We have the money to fix it. It's earmarked specifically for that, and I believe most years we don't spend it and give it back. But we do need to have it available for repairs if necessary. And I think that pretty much concludes our more. Any questions on those? Okay. Radio replacement for LFRCC will continue at $7,000. Is that an AOF reimbursement?
But it is shared.
It's shared, so it's a shared cost, $7,000. I believe that's finishing up a project that we had already started.
Funded by the E911 authority?
That's not, that one's gonna be on us, but it's a shared cost between us and our fire partners. I don't think we had anything for the AOF funds this year, is that correct?
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
I'll touch on that. So the next bullet point is just some information for you, just indicating that we have the intergovernmental agreement with the fire partners, and it kind of is ahead of the next page, the chart that we have there. There's a lot of numbers on our next chart. What we tried to do is and we did this last year as well, we tried to encompass all of the costs related to the fire partners in one place for everyone to see all the pieces of it. So if you look at the chart, you'll see we have it split out between the Fire Protection District, Highlands Ranch, City of Littleton. We have funding from Meadowbrook, Lockheed Martin, some other miscellaneous revenues, and then we try to break out the capital for each partner, what their share is, and then the EMT funds. And we're just trying to show you what the total revenues are versus the total expenditures for fire as a whole. So that's a lot to look at in one spot. So.
Question for the chief. How's it working with Martin Marietta?
Good. They keep us fairly busy, but we have a really good working relationship with them, and to our knowledge, are very happy with the service. I know that they did have a couple of grass fires that started, and we're very happy with the response we provided.
And those, the staff that they had transferred over to your guys?
Yeah, so we actually put, I think 3 of their individuals had applied with us. I think 2 of them actually got hired. I believe they're still with us, and 1 of them is actually set to start paramedic school next year.
Excellent. Thanks.
Confirm what you said about the grass fire. I did the tour, Martin, when they opened their new satellite facility a couple weeks ago, and Joe Rice was our leader. He praised a whole bunch of people about Littleton's fire department with the grass fire, so kudos.
If that wraps it up.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments, unless there's anything from council. Appreciate that. But again, tomorrow night I want to talk about a couple of very specific issues our fire partners want us to consider here to include within the fire department's budget. It's one of which is the addition of some battalion chiefs as it relates to the master plan, and the other is a series of, can't remember the total number of inspectors here to largely focus on our businesses on there's a scheduled summer annual. We'll talk about the detail of that. And quite honestly, some of the challenges that might pose for us, again, because of the revenue that we would receive relative to Tabor. So there's some interesting challenges. But I have, based on the fire partners meeting that we had this morning, they asked very specifically that we pursue those issues. And so it would be my intent to direct staff to start assembling the information that's necessary and then run that parallel here to our budget process for council consideration of that. So we'll talk a little bit more detail of that tomorrow night.
And we'll get to more of the details on it. The inspectors would be part of the fire marshal's group.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more detail. There's a lot of information that'll have to be fleshed out here in the next few weeks, but I wanted to give council a little bit better idea of what we're talking about here, because the fire partners have made it very clear here this morning that this is a significant issue to them.
Very good.
Chief, I think that's it. Any other questions for our chief? Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. To get in the lease for the additional lease amount for offloading and capital projects.
I'm sorry.
Fire inspections, there's an amount for an additional lease.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Is that in capital projects?
It's actually on the unfunded, or, no, I'm sorry, it's in city, no, it's in citywide. It's one of our last policy questions, I
Oh,
believe.
for this evening?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's a little bit. We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
I have on schedule-wise, it didn't come up yesterday or last night. Are we going to get around to talking about some of the TIF deals we have or tax incentives at some point, like King Soopers, Breckenridge, when they expire, when that falls into the...
We had not planned on that, but we certainly can report on that. That's a very fair question, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you touch on those issues here this evening, we can certainly...
Whenever you think it's appropriate.
Okay, let's try to cover those at the end of the evening. Sure.
And then the last point I had too, is like, I know on the King Soopers deal, where I don't know if it was a requirement or whatever, but King Soopers said they were gonna have 27 spots for bikes, like a bike rack, I guess. Is that a city requirement that they have that many? I mean, when I go over there, there's like 3 bikes on a busy day.
I do not know. But we can take those questions and certainly investigate and respond to that.
Yes. Probably parking requirements, I would guess.
Jocelyn might know.
Yes.
Okay, we're up to Public Works.
All right.
Hello,
Hey.
Keith Reister, Acting Public Works Director, once again here for a visit from a few minutes ago. I told everybody that since y'all kept me from the first part of the game last night, that we're shooting to get done by about 11 tonight. That's our target. Hopefully we won't have to go to overtime.
You're no Chief Stevens.
I've been going to him for coaching, so we'll see what happens. So we're going to dive right in. We'll try and be fairly expedient. There's a few things that you'll see that are some consistent themes along the way that I'll touch on as we go through different things. So I won't reiterate what's on the slides. I know that you can all read, so I won't do that. The first policy question we have is a series of capital projects that are related to their non-recurring capital projects, and the list is up there. The first one on that list is the Littleton Center elevator modernization. If you've been in this building, which you all have, we have one elevator. It's pretty dysfunctional, is probably a good way to put that, from both a safety standpoint as well as getting stuck in there is also a common occurrence. We have some serious limitations in the long run about the ability to make it totally ADA compliant, but we can get it within the parameters, and that's what this project would do. This is a very high priority for us. The other projects on there, at the service center at Bellevue, the next two of the projects are related to that. The first one is we have two entrances to that site, one of which we've already modernized the gate system, the other one we haven't, which is the access from the Bellevue side. And that's a serious security limitation. So this is a continuing replacement to bring both of those gates into a similar operational situation, and also provide additional security for the site. Letter D is sort of attached to that at Bellevue as well, which is an expansion of the security cameras that are over there. Other than this facility here, that's our highest density site related to equipment, all of those things from every department at some level has equipment there. We have security issues with our fuel island, and there's accessibility to that site from the railroad right-of-way. So this is really related to additional security at this site. This was actually just highlighted this past week when we got the CIRSA annual audit that they do of our facilities as well, and something that we should be turning our attention to. The letter C, you've all obviously spent plenty of time in this building, and most buildings wouldn't be constructed with that fine glass enclosure all the way around the outside. This building is more than 40 years old, and the window seals in there are about the same age. And so in large rainstorms, we do have some of those where they leak pretty significantly. And we also have personnel operating in those hallway areas now when we went to the permit center, the one-stop shop for permitting. So this is an ongoing project year over year as we continue to knock off doing improvements along the way for resealing of those, doing some upgrades along the way to add to all of the windows out there. This is not everything. This is the ones that need it, and we continue to look at those as they go along. We're not going to touch them unless they need improvement, because once you touch them, that old seal may not stay where it is. So we only touch the ones that need to be touched in a project like this.
So and the $60,000 doesn't get you all the courtyard?
Oh, no. Not even close. There's too much glass and too much structure out there to do that. An example of kind of the wear and tear on this building is if you go down the exterior stairs that's in the walkway over there. I mean, that's got 40 years of snow removal on it and exposure to the elements, and that walkway's got, classic exposure to rebar, and it's starting to rust and push out. And you have sort of the same thing with the window seals out there along this. So this can't, we'd probably be at 3 times that number at least to get all the windows in the complex, for sure. So this is to get the big offenders when it comes to letting Mother Nature into the hallways, probably, is the way to put it. The last one that's on the list is additional security cameras at the courthouse complex. Obviously, courthouses are high intensity, high user, with some interesting clientele, and so this is additional security at that site in the parking areas, as well as enhanced security at the entranceways to allow additional detail in the security footage, if necessary, related to if an incident occurred at that site. That's one of the things that you'll see highlighted in there. So those are 5 capital projects for this year that are in the capital fund. Any specific questions about those?
Sure. On the elevator, how old is the elevator?
As old as the building. It's the original.
40 years. Has it been rehabbed in the past?
No, it hasn't. It's really in the same condition.
It's never been rehabbed in 40 years?
No. I first looked in there, I thought maybe there were some small gnomes in there.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's been there a long time. It's always going to be limited in terms of the, as much as we'd love to have a new elevator that was ADA compliant, that's a huge investment in a building of this construction type. So we're kind of limited to what we can do. And if you can talk to our staff, several of our staff members have spent a little extra time in there in the dark or had a few rough landings along the way. So, you know, we have some witnesses to the instability of that, so we'd like to do some improvements on that.
So it's a 2-level, it goes 2 levels, right? So it's 135 will completely rehab it?
Yeah, it'll get it to a state where it's going to be operational, it'll be secure. It's not going to address the width issues or the turning issues that you have, like in what you'd like to do in an ADA compliant elevator, but it's the best we can do without having to really do a completely brand new elevator, which would be, you know, you're talking several $100,000 for a project like that.
And we're okay on that, on the ADA stuff as far as the rehab?
In terms of
not meeting the ADA fully.
well, that is a problem because we are, as a entity, required under federal law to take reasonable steps to meet ADA. Now, the answer is going to come up will be that if we have a complaint, is the government doesn't look at the ability to fund it versus the ability to do it. I know I'm working with the Public Works Department right now on an ADA accessibility plan, which is one of the things we need to have to move towards compliance. So, is it a risk? Yes. Is it a problem? Yes. The reality of it is we're taking the best step we can within our financial means to address it.
Our elevator inspector inspects that elevator, right?
Yep. All elevators are subject to inspection in the state on an annual basis. So yes, it gets inspected and it's still compliant from an operational standpoint, but I'm glad the building's not a lot taller.
Are we hiring out Dr. Cog to do the inspection still, or we do that ourselves?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, they don't do them anymore.
They do?
They have a third party, or did we hire?
Thank you.
Okay, that's policy question 6. So, any additional questions, or there are no objections, we're moving forward.
Good. Let's go.
Okay.
Okay, so related to the overall budget highlights that you see that are in difference, I underline the increase, decrease, reduce, so you can pick out what each of those line item was. Is an easy pick. The first one is an increase related to professional services to support development review engineering. This continues to increase at this level, and we're balancing. You're always in this balance of do you hire professional staff to do that, or do you continue to outsource that with consultants at the direction of staff? Historically in the organization, we've been reluctant to add additional positions. Between this addition and what we're spending, we are spending a fair amount, but it's very dependent upon the flow of development in the community. The last few years, we've had an increase, and so we need to continue to respond to that so we can be turn that work around in a timely manner for developers in the community. So this is really related to expanding that budget to do that. Throughout the year, as I think I highlighted earlier, in our engineering group, with the exception of one position, we are having a complete turnover in that group due to retirement in a 12-month period. And so we're also in a transition period where we're analyzing how the department is structured, how we're deploying personnel in the department, how we're using professional services. So this is something that we'll really have our finger on the pulse of as we go forward to make sure that we're as effective as possible in deploying our resources and meeting our organizational and community needs for this one.
On this one, Keith, we're still in the process of seeing new construction in the city at this point in time. But even after that, won't there still be infill and rehab and that? But is that at a different scale than what you're referring to as development review?
It's still in a development review, and it depends if it's a scrape or a rebuild. We still have some of those technical issues that we have to go through. Hopefully we'll have that kind of economic revitalization on an ongoing basis. So, but this is a chance, if we don't have that level of need, we're not going to spend all of this money. It's not a guaranteed spend because this is not a hire. This is a professional services contract.
So it allows some as-needed basis. Okay, thank you.
If I may, Keith, just add to this, tomorrow night we're going to talk a little bit about some proposed fee increases here as it relates to development review. And, one of the pieces I mentioned last night was that we do not have fees to cover cover any of the engineering costs. So in part, you're going to be seeing a proposal here to start over perhaps a 3-year period phase in a fee structure to cover at least the public works piece of this thing. So we'll talk more detail about that.
Yes, so we will talk about that. The other two items that are up there, the second one, as you know, one of the council priorities going into 2017 was development of transportation design standards for the community. We don't really have those at this point in time, other than a few scattered pieces in the code. And so we are still engaged in that project. We're hopeful that we'll have deliverables here late in the year on that. And as a result of that, there's going to be a decrease in this line item because we won't need that level of engineering services to complete that project, since it's all built into the existing scope of work for the consultant doing that with our team right now. So there will be a decrease in that line. The third item up there is we did a review of the last 3 years related to fleet expenses. So this is just a tightening in some areas. You know, some of those things, it's like, for example, fuel. We tightened down on that, but if Mother Nature throws a big winter at us, that may throw a wrench into that. So we just have to, it's a constant effort to tighten it up and balance that. Additionally, we've started the process within our fleet operations of really doing a more stringent analysis related to the age of the fleet, appropriate turnover cycles, appropriate replacement cycles, so that we are looking at, once you get to that curve, there's a spot in the curve where you're spending more to maintain it than you are to replace it. And so we need to be very diligent to make sure that we're doing that analysis on a constant basis for all the equipment in the fleet going forward.
And are we going to move a separate fleet fund back to that?
That is my intent. So for next year, you'll see an equipment fund. And so we used to have this methodology here before, but I think it's a much better way for us to understand, the true cost of what it takes to run a fleet. So in essence, the users pay a user cost for the equipment and an accrual for its eventual replacement. So we'll talk about how we set that up. I do know that our fleet manager, Alan Brown, basically has the concept already in place. That's how he operates. It's just so the work that's necessary to come back to that isn't really all that significant. But it is just philosophically a very different way to kind of look at our fleet. And quite honestly, in my opinion, I think it is probably the best approach.
So when we have that discussion, because in effect it is a big depreciation fund.
Absolutely.
Fund. Can we also look at it for some of the enterprise components and such, so that we're recognizing some of the cost of depreciation behind with regard to our infrastructure?
We can, sure.
I said we need to talk about it
You
tonight.
bet. We certainly can. We can do that. I'm looking at Tiffany and Keith.
Certainly to answer the first part of that question, Mark and I are certainly in alignment that moving to a fleet fund models, you operate it as a standalone business. It's like an enterprise fund, even though it's an internal service fund. And it also sets you up so you're stronger when it comes to replacement. Related to your question about the enterprise funds, our goal and objective would be, when you start looking at those, when we're building a sewer rate structure and a stormwater rate structure, that all the equipment necessary to operate that utility is included in that fund, including depreciation and replacement as well. And you want to make sure that that's built into your rate structure and your strategic plan, and so that would be a component of that work.
So didn't we, several years ago, do the fleet fund thing where we knew who was using, which department was using what, and costed it out, right?
Yeah. We'll talk about this in more detail, but one of the challenges for any fleet fund is how much that you actually hold in reserve, because you will never replace the fleet all in 1 year. So sometimes a fleet fund can actually have too much of kind of a fund balance sitting there. So that's always kind of the debate, is how much do you actually need sitting in that reserve. But that issue aside, the concept to me is still pretty sound. It's a much more transparent way for us to see the true cost of running the fleet for different operations. And so that is my goal, is to have that discussion with council here.
Gives us something to think over.
There you go.
Well, I mean,
Dedicated fund balance.
if also done well, it can also serve some of your property replacement that Tiffany was talking about yesterday.
Agreed. Yeah, there's some benefits to that and a level of accountability with user departments that I like. Yes.
I'll just throw out, if you're physically constrained, that's a great place to put all the vehicles, because you can put more control over what is a substantial part of the city budget. And because I've been there when we had to do that, and it wasn't comfortable for anyone, but it was a way to get it done.
I know, it is painful, but.
We go to that model, which sounds like a great idea, and I know there's some constraints on municipal accounting, but it seems like sometimes we'll have an asset, and that asset is broken into 2 or 3 or 4 different lines in different places of the statement, which makes it awful to analyze it. It's really, really difficult. Can we look real hard at putting those into place? Because I don't want to have to talk to Chief Armstrong about selling the front half of a fire truck. Is what, I mean, essentially that's the way the accounting is done. So can we make sure that we approach that in a way that promotes effective financial analysis of our statements?
We'd love to. I think that's our goal.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
And for accounting purposes, we do have to track which funds all of the capital assets are paid out of. We have a schedule that keeps that, but I understand keeping it all in one place for ease of seeing how much each item costs.
And I mean, sometimes maybe those can be drawn in together into a form of a management accounting statement that's more analytical, that would be for those of us who are not intimately familiar with all the line items. Might,
Did I hear you say CAFR?
huh? Well, but it just has to be in a way that can be analyzed effectively.
And we discussed this last year a little bit, and I think it looks like we're moving in that direction.
Trying to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Next slide. Just so you know, there is part of a fire truck. If you've been to the fire offices, they just have the front bumper in there, so they have sold part of it off.
Kind of like the old Dairy Queen.
What line item is it?
All right.
Line item for that, I hope.
So a couple other line items in the budget. We've looked at the annual utility expenditure trend. We anticipate, based on, checking in with all of our, we're just like everybody else, our utility bill, we're expecting somewhere between 3% and 4% going into the year. We continue to work towards energy efficiency across the platform, replacement of, LED lights, moving to higher efficiency lights, HVAC adjustments along the way. So we continue to do that as part of our energy efficiency planning. But we do expect a rate increase in this particular area across all of our utility platforms.
Does the cost of solar, we used to have a solar set of panels on the building and they become inefficient to operate. But technology continues to change in that regard. Do we ever get to a point where taking a look at this or even having our own thermal energy?
We certainly, I can tell you from our experience, Alan Brown and I, our facilities manager, Alan and I have recently talked with a couple of firms about coming in and doing, since, as you said, the technology in that particular area continues to advance rapidly, much like we've seen in LED technology. And so we continue to reach out to vendors and other firms out there to help us consistently take a look at that to see if there's opportunities available. So they're more than happy to lend their expertise in the discussions in an early stage to help you with that.
How many panels do we have now?
9.
We have none. They were removed.
Did we remove them?
Yes.
They've been removed.
We did leave the sign, though. I think it says solar panel closet out there in the hallways. We still have the signs. We do have a place to hook them up eventually. So, but yeah, we're certainly looking at that as another alternative, because that technology has progressed dramatically in the last, especially 5 to 7 years, for sure. So
Going back to the polls.
We haven't got that yet.
It's on it. Oh, I'm sorry, am I jumping ahead?
it's okay. I'm more than happy to share the polls.
Okay.
So with the next item, the polls are, so we don't own the the streetlights in this community to some extent. Excel is our provider. We do not have a separate street lighting district like you have in some communities. Some communities you'll see as a line item on your utility bills is street lighting. And it goes specifically to that street lighting fund. Over the last, to really kind of understand this issue with the lighting, is about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, all of the utilities, primarily in the United States, started to look at the infrastructure that they had installed. And a vast majority of the poles that are out there from a lighting standpoint did not meet, were failing due to long-term weather conditions as well as wind loads. And the first iteration of that was when they first said, please don't hang banners on our light poles anymore because it affects the structural wind loading on it. So that was the first iteration. And so 3 years ago, Excel went through all of the poles in this community, just like every other community here in the region, and rated all of their poles from basically F to A. And so they started with the F poles, and they're working their way through. And this is the last bunch, the C minus poles. And so their replacement's about $3,100 a pole. They do the work. We have to pay for it. It's the way the system works. And we were able to at least, arm wrestle them into splitting it over 2 years instead of just one to give us a little more budget flexibility on that.
We had at one point in time looked at getting to the point where we own the poles, since we have to actually pay for the replacement as well. And we had looked at possibly joining Golden and others in their discussion with Minneapolis over that. They're a bit antiquated in their ability to be able to take out their load over time and have continued to hold on to it till their hands are cold as far as that revenue stream. Where are we with regard to that possible joining suit and getting to the point where it gets a little bit clearer and direct?
I'm going to flip that one to Mark. I have some ideas, but I'll flip that to Mark.
Yeah, Amy had been part of a discussion, I think, before I got here with these other cities about trying to negotiate a purchase here with Excel. In my conversations here with Ken Feldman, this is before Steve got here, Ken had been working with the city of Golden this summer to try to be the first one to negotiate that. So we stepped back, I think, just based on our recent conditions here in the administration of the city. So we're watching that play out. But Golden's plowing some ground here for the rest of us. And so it is time for, I think, Steve and I to check back in with that city and Ken Feldman to see where that's gone. It was a little rough in the beginning of that discussion, is my understanding.
I still had some rough discussions with Excel and Jerome.
And just to clarify, we're attempting to buy back the poles from Excel that we gave to them in the first place.
Yes.
And we're paid to repair.
That's correct.
And paying to replace.
That's correct. None of us were here when that monopoly started, so we didn't set the rules up. But certainly I have some extensive partnerships with Golden Centennials, also at the front of that discussion as well. You're right. They're plowing. The ground is very solid that they're putting the plow into out there right now. So hopefully we'll see some progress there, because I think it would be, if you look around the country, even here in Colorado, when you see a lot of the non-investor-owned utilities like you have with, say, Platte River Power Authority, with Longmont, Fort Collins, Loveland, Estes, they own their own poles within their utility. In a lot of other states, primarily states like California and Utah and some places like that, you see streetlight districts is what you've seen develop over time. That's very common, and you have the same kind of mechanism. And if you plan for that, it's just like any other, the goal is to, own your own system, drive efficiency, in a situation like this, LED replacements, and you have a master plan for it, so that you don't end up with 3 or 4 year big chunks like this along the way. It's a challenge, and we'll see where it goes. So.
And I'll work with Ken Feldman on that. I had the pleasure, I guess I could call it, of doing the agreements to buy back off Arizona Public Services streetlights that we paid for the first time in Peoria, and then proceeded to pay Arizona Public Service again. So I've been down this road, as well as having the special districts to fund the streetlights after you acquire them, so.
We need to have that double revenue model for ourselves here. So
Yes.
we can build that in, so.
But
Go off the grid.
for whatever reason, we installed a lot of poles that weren't galvanized and they've been rusting, and we had that problem up and down Santa Fe, and now I cannot stop looking at the poles. And as I drive up Mineral, you know, we had people out there scraping all the paint off and repainting it, and now they're rusting again. So I don't know if those poles along the Mineral median from Santa Fe to basically Broadway, I don't know if those are some of the C through F poles that are being replaced.
I don't actually know that off the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to reach back out to their staff. I mean, you know, we have a good relationship with their staff. I'm more than happy to clarify that question and follow up after this discussion in the next week or so with some more detailed information about where they've been and where it will be going in the next stage.
Well, if they aren't, is there some kind of coating or something that we can put on? Because they need to be re-scraped and repainted or redone something with.
Okay.
A number of them. I mean, some of them looks like the paint is held and some of them it doesn't.
So yeah, we'll follow up on that. We'll get you some more information.
Yeah, sure it is.
I mean, they're exposed to the weather in so many different ways. Tough spot for sure. So.
Particularly on Santa Fe, they've talked about what's the MagChlor, what damage that does, as opposed to other things that might be more environmentally damaging than MagChlor.
Can you put some kind of sleeve on it?
You know, it's interesting. Actually, we were talking about this today with RTD. We met with RTD's facility staff, and we were talking about some of the things they're doing at some of their facilities, specifically their train platforms, because they have similar situations on the platforms related to mag chloride and those kind of things. I mean, we have the same issue right here on our own walkway. So it's an ongoing issue for all of us. So we're always trying to, find some methodology to help us out and reach out to those northern climes that have it all winter. It's always a good place to start. We get the benefit of the sun in the winter a little bit. So
Who owns the light poles in the parks?
I believe those are Excel poles as well. But I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I will answer it.
I know we have some rusted ones in Kittering, that's for sure. Right at the base.
I'll follow up on that question specifically.
Any other question?
Who owns the poles in the parks? And it may be, I'll have to look because to me, as I think about that, the ones that are on the exterior edges of the park, more than likely, those are Excel utility owned. But into the park, there may be some kind of combination, but I'm going to have to investigate that and get back to you for sure.
So if these need to be replaced and one falls and hurts somebody, who's liable?
Excel, they own the pole.
I wish it was quite that easy. Basically, Excel obviously owns the poles, so they're going to have a duty to maintain the poles safe. The poles are on our right-of-way, so we also have a duty to have our right-of-way safe. So the answer is, we're both going to get sued, and quite honestly, I'm going to point the finger at Excel, and Excel is going to point the finger at the city, and we're going to argue about it.
The judge will decide who's liable.
We have plenty of faith in you, Steve.
It's the person's fault for being in the wrong place.
Moving right along.
Okay. These are core projects that you'll see funded in the capital projects budget that we have related to infrastructure at this point in time. The traffic signal replacement program, I'll just go through these and then I think there's a couple slides after. 210,000, about 40,000 of that is included for pedestrian crossings. We continue to upgrade our pedestrian crossings at high volume locations. This is a reduction from 300,000 that was in the 2017 budget. We have 100,000 set aside for concrete pavement repair. Street rehabilitation, we touched on this briefly yesterday in our discussion, but that number is about $1 million in total, and it's our HUTF money. That's for those of you that are acronym unfriendly, that's Highway User Tax Fund, or the gas tax that you pay. We are legally obligated.
That'd be an initialism, not an acronym, by the way.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. So We have, so related to that.
I've been waiting all day for somebody to say that.
Thank you. So we have, this is the absolute minimum we can spend in this area. We are legally bound to spend the HUTF money on streets and roads according to both state and federal law. And so this is the minimum we are spending, as I noted yesterday. Probably the projection we have that we should be spending about between $3 and $4 million a year to maintain the system that we have. We've been behind that curve for quite a while. And so one of the things that we are working on pretty aggressively is a master plan and pavement condition index plan. And you will, instead of the trend that you've seen historically, which is really 1 year capital planning for street and pavement rehabilitation, you're going to see a different approach to that looks at 1, 3, 5-year capital plans, so you can see where we're going, where we've been. As an example of this, we got a new little feature on the website where you can go in there. There's a little slider map that goes back to 1981, and you can see the streets that have been paved or chip sealed or serviced in this community since 1981, and you can slide across the years. And one of the things you'll notice is it's very easy to see the buying power diminish over time as well, just in terms of the amount of ground you can cover. So our goal to bring to you is a more detailed short and mid-term plan, so you can see where we need to go and what the financial picture around that looks like to move the community forward related to infrastructure question, especially the pavement area.
Is this the time to talk about that particular line item?
Yes.
All right. I think we should be spending $3 million on roads in 2018. There's no point carrying a fund balance, not spending it, while we're not doing road maintenance that needs to be done.
So that's the question that we've had at different times in the past. I think you probably are ready to talk about that somewhat, and we may need to go into more detail in the future, but we've kicked this around, and I think you did talk about how you would manage a fund balance, down to what level, what kind of policy issues we had, and what the table expectations were.
Right. So when it comes to the street rehab and the capital projects fund, what we did, and we've talked about, is we have a 5-year fiscally constrained capital projects fund. And unfortunately, we're not able to meet the $3 to $4 million that is requested within our 5-year fiscally constrained budget. If council wanted to go in that direction, we would have to significantly reduce some other projects that are in the forecast. And frankly, there's not very many large projects that you could reduce to afford the $3 million in the street rehab. Some of our bigger expenditures and capital projects are technology and fleet replacements. We have $1.2 million worth of fleet replacement in 2018. $750,000 of that, if I remember correctly, is related to 3 individual pieces of equipment that are at the end of their life that really do need to be replaced, whether they're street sweepers or large trucks of that nature. But if it's council direction that you'd like to spend $3 million, then we'd have to seriously look at the line items to see what else you might be reducing in order to do that over the next 5 years. Because frankly, we don't have enough fund balance to do that much every year.
One other thing maybe to toss into the discussion here, of course, if the Tabor measure, the first one passes at 1.9 million, roughly 1.5 of that is, as council directed, would be street maintenance. So added to the 1 million, we'd be roughly at 2.5 million. The other balance, of course, of that Tabor measure is for that intersection at Bowles and Federal. So you would come close to meeting that goal here for at least next year, if that measure passes. Now, one approach you could take is, maybe rely upon some level of confidence that will, and then maybe have a more detailed discussion to try to address kind of a longer-term financial challenge there with the balance of street maintenance.
Right.
Or not.
Well, my personal opinion is I don't want to transform the Tabor question into a replacement. Appreciate that. We should be doing streets. If you give us a table of streets, if you don't give us a table, we're not going to. We're projected to have $9 million in reserve at the end of 2018 to not do projects that need to be done now in something as important as street infrastructure, because we anticipate spending that 5 years in the future. I don't think is going to resonate very well with our citizens. That's my opinion. So,
Could you, for a moment, Tiffany, touch on council's decision, as we've gone through the budgets, has been to retain a certain percentage. And the reality of some of the city operations is because we pay our bills on time, but the money doesn't always come in on time. You do need to have, not just as a reserve, but an ability to always have an account balance just to do business.
Right.
Could you kind of tell us, where are the bottom lines, where would the bottom lines from your point of view be on a reserve in order to get us through, as Councilmember Clark's talking about, and then be able to maybe swing some money loose?
So are you referring to the general fund and the capital kind of in conjunction?
Well,
general fund, you need to have some kind of reserve to handle potential delays in revenue. Capital projects fund, though, we really don't need a reserve, although I think we've said in the past we want to do 1 year's worth of lease payments.
Right.
So that's like $1 million, if I remember.
Right. So in the capital projects fund, we do want to maintain a minimum fund balance to meet our minimum lease payments, which are about $1.4 million. Now those lease payments are going to fall off in, I believe it's year 2024, if I remember correctly. It's going to go drastically down. But, you know, if the city were to issue additional debt between now and then, we could potentially have additional lease payments in the future. So just kind of keep that in mind. But currently, we're looking at about a $1.4 million fund balance is what we'd like to keep in the capital projects. And it's to pay our lease payments in the event that we don't have any revenues coming in to cover that. That's the current policy, and that's the policy that I would recommend definitely to meet our debt obligations for sure.
then the Tabor Reserve mandated, is that in operational then?
The 3% Tabor mandate is actually in the general fund. The general fund is the one who kind of covers that. So the 17% that we currently have in the general fund, 3% of that is the Tabor portion.
And 14% of it is a discretionary decision that council made.
Right, right. And council's current reserve policy allows for 8 to 18%. And historically, we've been at 17%, which is equivalent to about 2 months of operations, which I think is probably the minimum that I would recommend for the city to be at. Just 2 months of operations, you have a large catastrophe. It doesn't take long for us to not have revenues to cover those expenditures for a couple of months potentially.
There's a pretty big correlation in the business community between spending down your reserves and business failure. That applies to cities too. Worked in Detroit pretty well. And so, you know, I'd be significantly opposed to spending down reserves to do this. I mean, a reserve really in a sound business practice should be regarded as a fixed expense or a fixed fund for just the kind of situations you're talking about. If you don't have the money to fix your streets, it's an indication we need to cut expenses or raise revenues somewhere else. I mean, it's an expense, and someday we're going to have to face the piper on that. We've kicked the can down the road a long time, and we don't know what the solution is to that, but we need to face up to it. And but spending down reserves is you're on the path to business failure, and the city's no different in that respect. So.
When it comes to streets and what we're looking at, we have a number of items where the council has received presentations on how do we deal with capacity issues that we currently have and getting to the point of reliability and mobility within the city. And those costs are significant, and any resolution of those will require at least a city share component on those. And maybe Keith and Mark, you can comment on those as well.
There are, one of the things that we've talked about at the staff level is that historically, Littleton has not gained a big share of revenue from outside sources for transportation compared to peer communities. And as we move into the next TIP planning cycle with DRCOG and with CDOT and the state, it is imperative for us to be active and to be a participant in that so we can maximize our opportunity to gain additional revenue from other sources to address the challenging problems that we have.
You'll be taking those DRCOG staffers out to lunch periodically, right?
We'll get there. So, you know, I mean,
It's not the staffers.
Yeah, no, I mean, So,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, yeah, and it is at a simple level. You know, one of the things that's very important in the process is, you know, you need to be active, you need to be a participant, you need to partner with your other communities, and you need to be a player in the game to be successful. And historically, Littleton hasn't really gained a lot of revenue that way, and we need to do a better job of placing the priority of our needs and telling the story of those needs to not only our local community but our regional and state community, so that we can benefit from the value of those additional funds.
Let me add something I think that's a little more specific to the issue here. DRCOG is looking at a different allocation model here, for which Councilmember Cernanic has been part of that conversation. And I think they're going to make a pretty formal decision here at the end of the month on what that percentage allocation would be.
Next Wednesday when we're having our telephone town hall.
Here's the change, is that they're looking basically at kind of two pots of money. One is kind of regional and others are called sub-regional. The sub-regional is where, and I've commented on this before, where I believe the city of Littleton has much more to gain by this new model. It's going to require a level of participation that we have not done in the past. And the benefits to us, I think, are pretty substantial. However, there is also going to be, in many cases, a requirement to financially participate kind of in a minimum here to match up with some of those funds. So in order to get those, we'll have to actually match up. Now, I have experience in the Seattle area with the exact same model that DRCOG is contemplating here. And in my opinion, this is definitely a win for the city of Littleton if we go this direction. Again, if the allocation percentage is the way we hope it will be, and not flipped the other way around, where the sub-regional, quite honestly, is pretty small. But if it goes the way most of us hope, I think there is a lot to be gained. But again, that financially we'll have to have something in order to match those funds, to maximize our opportunities, whether it's Broadway, Santa Fe, Littleton Boulevard, whatever we might pick for kind of a sub-regional project. That's the challenge for us here in the future.
And just to add to that, on the sub-regional side, there's actually going to be a meeting this Friday coming up. The commissioners, the mayors, and the managers in Arapahoe County have had a general discussion of this and then a little more specific discussion of this, and we're going to get more detailed, trying to understand what it means next Friday. But as we looked at it, that sub-regional group has to have some kind of size. You know, it can't be too small, can't be too big. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You know, it's got to be just right. And it seems that Adams County may be a model that is worth looking at. They've taken the communities in Adams County and joined them together. And so issues regarding transportation then go through this sub-regional group. What the governance of the group is and all that still yet to be decided. But we feel like if DRCOG is going to move that way, we need to be ready to jump. You know, but more than that, you know, we're kind of just making sure we're not behind the curve, but we're ready to jump. But the big discussion a couple weeks ago was that there's no way that this will go forward without a 40% match, or put up some money ahead of time for the engineering study, or whatever. And the group of people in the room, Littleton is not alone. We are very similar in our constraint issues. And so we were all very concerned about that and where we would fall with the big dog, which is like Denver, you know, or the big dog CDOT or whatever. So, I mean, you know, I know that's going on at Dr. Cobb too.
Yeah, and I mean, the current thought within the discussions is the subregions will be by county. Whether that continues to hold or not, it's probably 90% in that direction. And that's why partnerships with local communities, and it also quadruples the city's responsibility because we have a piece of Jefferson County, we have a piece of Douglas County, in addition to Arapahoe County, plus the regional. So it actually does that. I don't know if it's going to come up in that discussion, but Dr. Quagg has offered to come out to Arapahoe County for training of staff in this regard, which they basically package together the project that's there, and that will be a very important part. But the key piece is greater your co-funding share, the higher likelihood there will be of getting additional dollars. And so it's not one where you go to the table and you say, give it to me, without saying, here's what I have to offer. And that becomes an important part of the discussion that's going to transpire. And I don't know how next Wednesday's discussion is going to end up as far as which are the larger pools. What Mark is talking, or what general ranges have been, is anywhere from 30% regional, 70% sub-regional, to 70% regional and 30% sub-regional. I will tell you where we have hoped, and certainly our position is, but it's a tenuous discussion because it's a change what has been the historical method of allocation. And the difficulty at the Dr. Quagg board in the discussions is, rather than dealing with the principles of the issues, jurisdictions are starting to, unfortunate choice of terms on my part, but cloud their discussions because of their projects that they are anticipating, as opposed to what is actually going to be a longer term approach. So those things that are out there. But then, in addition to this, part of the reasons also to have elements of general fund reserve is we have a number of questionable items that come up. One is, we've talked about the retail sales model change, and needing to be in a position where if that needle changes quickly or slowly, being in a position to say, hey, we need to be looking at that. And those are not necessarily discussions for tonight, but it's just to say, hey, that's part of the reason that we need that operating reserve for if there's a turn in the economy that might change, or if there's actually systemic change that occurs.
Bottom line is, we just need to position ourselves for what we can control and be ready to go.
And so to Doug's issue, and I would love to put more money in the streets.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm totally in favor of that, but I'm not sure that having some money in reserve over the next year as this thing works out, you might be able to leverage it. It might be able to be leverageable to give us more than if we were to put it into a specific project.
I would suggest to you, Bill hit the nail on the head. We either have an expense problem or we have a revenue problem. And I would submit that we have an expense problem. We may have a revenue problem. But if you're trying to make a case to the voters, it's pretty hard to tell them that while we're sitting on $11 million of reserve in the general fund and almost $9 million at the end of 2018 in reserve in the capital projects fund, that we can't fix the streets that have problems right now, because that may delay us being able to replace a street sweeper 5 years from now. If we really have a revenue problem, you're going to have a hard time convincing the voters while you're sitting on millions and millions and millions of dollars of reserve. And I realize it's very difficult to let go of the cash, but we exist to provide service, and one of those very basic services is road maintenance. And if we're hanging on to funds because of a need 5 years in the future, when we have a need right now, and we're simultaneously making the argument that we don't have enough money, I think it's going to be a difficult argument for the voters to buy. So we've got almost $9 million projected at the end of 2018. I'm not suggesting we spend $9 million on roads, but if we upped it by $2 or $3 million, that would still leave us $5 or $6 million in fund balance that allow us to tackle some significant sections of roads. And then perhaps as we go through and address some of our expense issues, like getting a fleet fund and some other issues like that, then we can look at what's happening long-term with our capital projects. I anticipate this is going to be a very confusing election because we're talking about having excess table revenue while at the same time saying we don't have enough money to fund this stuff while we're sitting on big fund balances and multiple funds. And I don't know how the public's, I have an idea how the public's going to perceive it.
These sound like big numbers, but they don't happen by accident. You know, these are the kind of things, and I don't know what the city did after the Great Recession of 08, 09, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had to dip into reserve.
I'll tell you what the city did in those years. We cut all the department heads' budgets by 5 to 10%, depending on what year it was. We had some significant cuts across the city. The other thing that we did is our capital projects fund balance was almost only $2 million back in 2007, 8, and 9. And we just did not have any revenues coming in so that we could make infrastructure improvements. And we're seeing that today. Things that we put off over the last 7 to 10 years is coming to fruition. The elevator issue. That was never in the horizon that we needed to replace the elevator. However, it came up within this last year that we have some serious issues with
How
that
could a
elevator.
40-year elevator not be on the horizon?
Because we were only looking
It was on the second
in the
floor.
near future. It was on the 40-year plan, not the 5-year plan.
An elevator life is like, what, 20 years? You probably know.
I know.
It's just an example of how we put repairs and money into our buildings. We put them on hold during the recession, and we just had to. And now we're seeing these things come out that we're going to have to replace and we're going to have to address.
It's the same kind of practice that if you're raising a family and you've got a kid ready to go to college and you've got money in the bank, but the kid's going to have to get scholarships because you can't spend all your money in one area. You cannot spend your reserves down. It's irresponsible government management to do that. And I know that the voters are looking for somebody that'll come and deliver better news to them. But fiscal responsibility says you've got to keep a certain level of reserves. And these numbers are, you guys talk about this at your CFO conferences, I'm sure, that these are minimal numbers. You said that earlier. To have a healthy government down the road. And to spend that money on roads right now it's a great short-term cure, but we're here for policy, for long-term vision, not to solve something that sounds good in the next election. I think we need to do this in a way that guarantees that Littleton is healthy and financially sustainable over the long term.
So I don't know where it fits in the discussion, but remember that the city manager talked about in the April, May timeframe, taking a look at how did this year close out, what were funds were not fully spent, how has it all worked out, and what's been left over, because in the past, if it was $300,000, I'm just picking a number, we made choices about how it was spent. Now he's asking, we really don't know, give that council an opportunity in May to look at it and make the decision how to commit to it. Is that a time, and I know Doug's going to say we're kicking it down the road, But is that, but is there some advantage to knowing a little bit more than we know now?
Well, I'm going to agree with you on that one, Bruce, which is we'll know better whether it's April or somewhere in that time frame. And Keith, you can make a judgment that if at some point in time we threw more dollars in, April would still give us enough time, at least my experience, to put in summer projects when the weather is good to deal with roads. And that would be a much easier time when we'd actually know what happened in this year's holiday buying season. So we'd have at least the fourth quarter, if not a portion of the first quarter's revenue components. And we can take a look at that. I mean, at some point in time, we have a long economic recovery time frame that's out there, and we hope that it never stops, is the wish that's there. But that has not been the economic cycle over the past centuries. There's always been some adjustment period, and to be in a position to weather that without doing draconian measures would make some sense.
What I would like to suggest is we talked about coming to council in March or April to kind of give you an idea of where the general fund ended up in the year and the other funds as well. And so what I think we would suggest is that at that point in time, we can look at where we ended at the end of the year. We can compare it to our 17%, see where we are. If we have excess, then we could discuss that with council at that time. And again, update our 5-year projections to kind of give you an idea of where we are at that point in time. And then I think that would be the point where council can decide if you would like to transfer that to the capital projects fund. And we can certainly do an appropriation increase or change in mid-year at that point, or even a few months after. So that's kind of what I would suggest. And I think that would get...
I don't think we need to transfer. We've got $9 million at the end of fund balance in the capital projects fund. Why would we transfer more money into the capital projects fund? Bill brought up a good point, and that was what happened in the recession. And 3 of us were here. You were here. Wendy, you were here. Kelly, you were here. The staff came to us with a budget that was a deficit budget that spent more than the revenues because it spent down some of the reserves. And you might remember, after the first day of budget, we said that's not what we had in mind. We want you to bring us a budget where the expenditures match the revenues. And the argument that we got back was, that's what reserves are for. If you're not going to spend them now, when are you going to spend them? And the fear that we had was, we didn't know how long the recession was going to last. We had heard that it was going to be a short one, and then we started getting these indications that it was going to drag out for a longer period of time. And so what scared us about spending down the reserve was, we're afraid that that might have been a 4 or 5 year recession rather than the 3 years or so that it was. But the question was, if you're not going to spend the reserves then when are you going to spend them? And it was a very valid question, because we got to the point of we were discussing furloughs and we didn't furlough, but you remember we were very tight. We have a general fund range of 8 to 18%. We picked 17%, 1 percentage point from the maximum that we've said that we want to have. We have $9 million in the capital projects, and we're not spending it to fix some of the very basic needs that we have in front of us right now, because we don't know what's going to happen 4 years down the road. Because we have a 5-year capital project plan, and we can't do all the capital projects for 5 years. Well, folks, we don't know what the economy's going to be doing 5 years down the road either. And I'm not suggesting that we get rid of all of our reserve. But I am suggesting that if we sit on millions of dollars of reserve and we try and make the argument that we don't have enough money, don't have enough revenue to do the basic services, that it's going to be hard for people to hear that. So I still advocate $3 million for roads, out of the capital projects without transferring anything else from the general fund.
So right now, tonight, we can make that decision whether or not we're gonna pull from there to go down to 15%, whatever the number might be.
For capital projects, this
Right.
isn't touching general fund. General
Right,
fund
we can do
stays
that,
there.
that's, we need to make that decision, because it's, right now, the roads are 3 million, but next year, it's gonna be 4 million.
Well,
whatever.
and we know they deteriorate faster.
It's
We're-
gonna,
We're against the rusting problem. Rusting.
Yeah, so to not fix the roads, while we're sitting on money, which causes the expenditure to be more in the future, just doesn't seem,
which is our job to take care of, and we're not taking care of it. But this has been kicked down the road forever. I mean, not forever, but for very many decades at this point. We gotta do something to fix the roads, period. To get them up, to what level would we get them up? I know you gave us a number, we're in the 60s.
There's actually a slide further back in here. We're in the low 60s now.
Right.
And declining.
So if we kick in the 3 mil, where would that put us?
I can't answer that off the top of my head, but
We could calculate
we
that.
can calculate that. I mean, one of the things that,
Well, rough guess, I mean, what does it do? I mean,
You might get to 65 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, just remember the scale of this issue here. So the three, if I remember the work that was done here before I got here, probably 2014, they were suggesting a $4 million expenditure over 10 years just to kind of catch up to a point where then you can drop the expenditure to about 3 million from that point forward.
well, what I'm thinking though is that we need to get to that level, whether it's 70% or whatever it is, so that it becomes maintainable where we're not diminishing.
Yes, the goal is somewhere between 70 and 75 for the
Right.
pavement condition index.
What will it take us to get to that? I mean, if 3 million isn't going to get us there, then that concerns me, but is it 6 million?
it wouldn't get us, 3 years and 1 year wouldn't get us there. I can say that assuredly. You don't get to a 60 overnight. And, looking at, one of the things that, is in some of those later slides, a consistent theme, whether it's this or stormwater or other, is we don't have multi-year capital plans in place. So for example, if I can't come to you right now and say, if you spent $3 million this year, this is what would be tackled, and then what we would need in 3, 4, and 5 after that. That's something that hasn't been done here before, and that's what our staff is working to develop, so that the decision makers and the community understand where we are and what that gap is. I would suggest that you're looking at a multi-year investment at that level to move us from 61 to the 70 range. For sure.
Did you say we don't have an asset management plan?
That is correct. That is correct.
Not for pavement. I did a one-time review in 2014, a
Right.
one-time snapshot. What Keith is trying to fulfill, kind of a commitment here that Public Works made to develop a system where we can update that every single year, so we don't have to do a one-time snapshot. Now, based on the work that I saw in 2014, I bet the level of expenditure is to get us to 70 is probably in the magnitude of 4 million over 10 years to get to 70. So that's roughly.
So we did a plan in 2014. Did
No.
we just file it away, or what?
They did an evaluation.
Evaluation. So what have we done with that evaluation?
Our staff now is going through that to develop a long-term plan. The condition index was done in 2014, but no long-term plan was developed out of that. And so that's what we're attempting to do now, is to use that data as well as updated data that we have at this point in time to build out where we are and where we need to go. That's part of what I discussed a couple of weeks ago related to sewer. We need to do the same thing in stormwater. We need to do the same thing in facilities. All of those areas are places where right now we just have that gap, and we have to collect that data and build that foundational base so that it's a better situation for both short and long-term decision making.
I guess one thing I'm trying to make a point, if I may,
Yeah.
trying to make a point of is that, we do these studies. We did something in 2014, and as I was cleaning out some of my council stuff the other day, I came across, I think it was at least 2 Littleton Boulevard studies, and then I know it was brought up last night, and we didn't want to do another one, but we have all these studies where we spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we don't do anything. Man, we have got to get a better handle on this.
Yes, I agree. Now, in the case of the pavement, the staff has acted on, to the council's credit. For the last 2 years, you've spent a level in street maintenance, quite honestly, the highest level ever. So you made that decision based on the data that we saw in 2014. I think what Keith is trying to communicate is that we're trying to take that one-time snapshot and develop a model internally, so we don't have to hire consultants anymore, and actually do that work, and so we can project to the future every single year. That consultant did not create that model in 2014 for us, and so we're trying to take it to the next step. But again, to the council's credit, you have spent the last 2 years a pretty significant amount of money towards street maintenance.
Well, that's a good direction to be going in it. I mean, we all want to improve our streets. I don't think you could find anybody who doesn't want to do well on this. Let me try this at a little bit different angle. Next Tuesday morning, Mayor Hancock and I are doing an economic presentation to a part of the Denver business community. And part of the...
Name dropper.
Well, no, I mean, because he's doing part on tourism and I go back and do economic recovery work. And we've got 3 major events that have happened in my business lifetime. The RTC crisis, which was in the late 80s, 9/11, and then the Lehman Brothers crisis. We are now into something like 30-odd months, and I'll have a better number on that, but some 30-odd months of continuous economic recovery. We usually have man-made economic catastrophes that come along. We are overdue. We've got a tenuous world situation. We've got a healthy city right now. I think I want to put as much money as we possibly can into the roads. But to relieve yourself of your financial flexibility is just not prudent. And we're all trying to go out there and get the new car when we're having to put money into our car every week. But that's where we are right now. We've been a long time without addressing other fundamental changes, and I don't know what those answers are. But reserves are a critical part of running a business, and that's a message that comes out study after study after study. I'd love to put $3, $4, $5 million into the roads. We're hearing right now that we don't know how much that'll do for us. If it'll get us back on track. We know it's a bigger bite of the apple than we can really afford to do, even if we spin it down to zero. If we want to make a token move to show that we're doing that, fine, but it should not be a fundamental paradigm change in the way we reserve our funds and affect the city's financial sustainability.
You made my point, that if we're saying $3 million, what does it get us?
We don't know.
Exactly. Does it really make a difference? And yet we spend down some of our capital.
And I don't, maybe we'll choose to do that, but I'd like to ask staff to go back and say what makes a measurable needle move. But recognize also that our capital funds, it's not just streets.
Sewers.
Well, we have, the sewers are kind of a little bit in the enterprise fund, but we've made some transfers for stormwater failures that have occurred, and we have building or more than one that is at the edge of utilization, if not collapse. So glad that Irma's not coming through here and at this point in time. So.
But tonight we're in a budget meeting, though.
I know, but what I'm asking for is better information from staff that says, what's it going to take to maybe move the needle?
So you want to reschedule the budget meeting? Because this is when we need to either park that money.
I want more information than is around the table right now.
I absolutely agree, but that's what I'm saying. Is it something where we just park the money? With the possibility, did we get that information we're talking about?
Or, sharpen a pencil, and if there's something that can be brought back soon, or put a time frame out that says, here's when we can get that information.
I'm sure that by tomorrow we could provide you some kind of an estimate here. And again, we're going to talk about capital tomorrow night, so we could perhaps put this issue on the parking lot, so to speak, come back to it. And sorry, I don't put it.
Parking lot that needs to be saved.
Yeah. Might have potholes in it, but
or movable slabs.
So we're trying to give you some estimates about what level of investment over what period of time would move that needle up to a more, reasonable.
I agree, 'cause this is crunch time. Phil is right, but this is crunch time. Now is the time to make the decision.
If that sounds fair, we can finish it tomorrow.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
I like it.
So we're kicking the can slightly down.
Just tomorrow.
Just to tomorrow.
Monday down the road.
23 hours.
Wait, not 10 years.
And I do want to point something that was said, just for the last 2 years, the council did find more money and put more money into the streets. I mean, we have walked the walk too, to some extent. And so I would like to walk the walk on this budget code
Absolutely.
also. We just don't know how exactly to do it.
I think, Mayor, just to continue, the last 2 bullet points in this section are really about capital expenditures for fleet. And the only last highlight bullet point there is last year, for the first time, you set aside $50,000 in the budget to do some downtown sidewalk infrastructure improvements. Those are slated to actually occur in October. We wiggled that around in the schedule to avoid some of the heavy season of downtown traffic, pedestrians and such. And so we've asked to set aside that 50 again for next year. And that's part of developing a down, we'll continue to do that work, but that's another place where we need to develop a downtown master plan for infrastructure. So those are the last 2 bullet points in that section.
I have one question, and it may not even be yours, it might be Jocelyn's, I don't know. But the question is a year or 2 ago, we talked about, we have those cards that have the streets and the location of those streets where everything is basically shifted over. Many of the streets are shifted over, but we have those historic cards. We were going to do something with those at one time. Have we ever done anything with those historic cards?
I'm not sure.
The cards, it's kind of like the old Hollerith cards and the libraries used to use, but now we don't use those anymore. Now we have these old box of cards.
I'm not familiar with that, Jerry.
Does anybody remember that?
Yeah. Maybe is Tim here? Well, where's Tim?
Back there. Some of them, yeah. I think Roger is the one that had them. There's a box of cards that are historic, but it has Littleton streets laid out, but they're like cards.
I remember that discussion. I think the museum great job.
I don't know, but I'd be happy to find out.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So, we're really falling behind on time. We do need to take a break. Can we take a little break?
My suggestion is that's the last of the Public Works General Fund items. The few slides after that were detailed about what we just actually spoke about. So if you'd like to deal with these particular grouping of items, we can take a break, and then the last 2 things we have after this are a brief discussion of the sewer utility and the stormwater utility.
And that'll bring us to policy question 3, which is been delayed. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
Brief and
First up.
I don't think it's.
here after a few minute break. We're still going through the presentation. If anyone's looking at our PowerPoints or trying to go through our budget book to keep up. This is the Sewer Utility Enterprise Fund point that we're going to pick the discussion back up again. And it does include us then including that discussion of policy question 3, which was delayed from last night because the GIS person is primarily involved in this operation. And that's what we wanted to talk about. So I turn it back over to Mr. Easter.
Yes, thank you. We have three specific questions related to the sewer utility. We touched base with you back in August, I think, or early September, in that neighborhood. We talked about the sewer utility before. The three particular items you see here, the first two are at some level technology related, and the third one is related to the treatment plant. The first one, and Ken Price is here because they actually, this particular position is actually housed in Ken's department, even though we pay for it in the sewer utility. We are, about a year and a half ago, Littleton invested in GIS technology. We have a full-time GIS analyst, and over the last year we've had an individual in a GIS tech position as an intern, and we believe that this position is necessary as a regular full-time position to support our moving forward related to GIS, mapping, asset management, and everything. And this is, as you can see, there's a list of the things on the next slide of what this position does, the role that this position plays, and it supports mapping and data for all the departments in the city. But primarily this position is housed within the sewer utility. The GIS division supports the whole city. This particular position is very much tied to the utility infrastructure and the sewer utility infrastructure. The total cost of this position is $77,000, and we believe that this is critical to moving forward, and it's housed within the sewer utility fund. Any questions on that one? Go ahead.
Keith, with this, is this something that could be the position utilized by some of our connector districts, and is something that maybe they could reimburse us for? That would kind of double up on
theoretically, we could bill back to those districts if they need to utilize that. Right now, I can say honestly that this position would be fully utilized by the city. Is where we are in the GIS scheme of things compared to peer communities and where we need to be going. I'm pretty sure full utilization would take place. But if that opportunity arose, we would certainly entertain that discussion to offset some of those costs.
Because we, at times, have brought up the issue of possibly being impacted by a failure in the connector districts.
Yep.
So are you anticipating that 100% of his time is devoted to the sewer collection system?
At this point in time, the two places they've done, the work they're doing is almost exclusively sewer, occasionally some stormwater work, but primarily in sewer at this point in time. That's the intent.
But if he's doing stormwater, then we have to account for that in the stormwater.
We would look at an allocation.
The second item, we actually talked about this when we met about the sewer utility. This is our move.
Let's go ahead and make sure council doesn't have any concerns about continuing ahead with policy question 3 included in our budget. Okay.
Policy question 3?
Yeah.
That's where
GIS.
That's where it falls.
We had to go back and
Carry over.
they decided.
Out of order, sorry.
Okay, so this.
Up 17893.
Okay, now policy question 7.
Yes. Policy question 7, we touched on this when we met and talked about the sewer utility. This is our efforts to move forward in terms of asset management, condition indexing, and master planning for the sewer utility. In order to do that, we need to secure a platform to do that. There's several high-quality platforms out there in the marketplace, from CityWorks to Excella to Cartograph, and this is the cost of getting that platform up and running and the software to do that. This is pretty competitive. Obviously, we've reached out to other communities. We have not made a decision on a particular vendor at this point in time. We would go through the process of selection in partnership with our IS department and our team and come up with the right platform, because this sets the table. This is the foundation for everything else related to your asset management platform.
So between this and the GIS and my words, not yours, the scoping within the system will have current status and the ability to tell where things are over time, and this will help us essentially with regard sewer utility particularly be in position to have a asset management plan coming.
Yes, that you phrased it very well. Yes.
And I'm assuming Kim's going to be intimately involved in.
Oh yeah, this is a co-led, co-partnership kind of thing, for sure.
The colonoscopy on the system is the key word.
So any other questions on this? Because this is policy question number 7. You okay with moving that forward?
Yes.
At this point in time, I'm going to flip it over.
I did have one, I'm sorry. So on number 7, it says, does council support investing? So we're going to invest money and we're going to get money with a profit somehow?
We'll be more efficient, more effective.
Yeah.
We're going to, but do we support being more efficient, not investing then?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Peggy, I was waiting for you to say it.
Well, we are making an investment in software.
She's training you.
Well,
He's training you, Jerry.
I mean, the part that this does is it says we're more on top of it so that we'll catch an item where maintenance will be a better answer than waiting for failure and rebuild.
Correct. In fact, if you remember, I've talked with the council before, ultimately one of the things I want out of an asset management system is to understand our risk. So depending on the level of investment that we make in any utility or any piece of infrastructure, asset management will tell you, based on that expenditure, that investment, here's your risk. And that's the piece that ultimately I want to get to.
Okay. I'm going to kind of flip this next slide to Tiffany at this point.
So this next slide is related to any rate increase for the sewer fund in 2018. And we had a discussion, I believe at the end of July, August possibly, where we went over the 5-year projections for the sewer fund. And at that time, and currently today as well, I'm not recommending an increase in 2018. And the reason for that is because, and Keith might be able to touch on this a little bit more, is that we're looking to do a full rate study within the next couple of years. And I feel at this point, we don't have a good grasp on what our capital needs are in the future, and so I feel like I want to use this as kind of just a stable year where we continue status quo as far as rates are concerned until we have some more information related to that rate study to see where we really need to go at that point in time. And we're going to do an in-depth study on inside city rates versus outside city rates at that time as well. So I think we'll have a better idea of where we're headed at that point in time.
So, on the next slide, oh, you already got it there. This is a rundown of the sewer utility expenses related to the treatment plant. John Schmin covered this with you at some level when he was here to visit. He's going to be visiting with us again later in the month related to the biogas project. So I put that up here, and we're going to kind of talk about that for a second. As you know, we jointly own this plant. You can see our operations budget share. There's a 4% increase over the year, but from year to year. But we also are very pleased with the tightening of expenditures in the budget at the treatment plant versus where they've been in the past. I think that's a very good trend for sound financial management. On the capital project side, the total budget is $11.1 million. The total increase of 8.5 from the 2017 budget. Our share is obviously 50% of that. Of the 11 million, About 8 of that is the biogas project, which John talked to you about in preparation for that next meeting. They do have the full consultant's report back, which you'll be getting shortly from them. And so one of the discussions that we've had is that in simple terms, whether we move forward or not with the biogas project, Englewood has budgeted their share of this project already in their budget. And so we have some alternatives here related to how we handle this. Do we budget for our share at this point in time and put it in the regular budget? Do we put it in the budget at this time with a caveat, waiting for a decision to be made with more consultation and by the supervisory committee? Or do we not put it in at all at this juncture? So those are really 3 alternatives that we have at this point, and we just need some clarity on that to move forward with what we'd like to do.
I vote for the last at this point.
And I think, if I may, after talking to Eric Heck and John Kuzman, with John coming back here at the end of the month, I think that's another decision point for the council where you could decide at that point, biogas in or out. And there's pluses and minuses, but I thought you might want to hear his presentation just to make that decision.
Well, I welcome his presentation. I have some questions from the consultant's report. I think they gave rather short shrift to the whole private purchase.
They did, clearly.
And the schedule, they've already missed the schedule. The schedule looked like it wasn't very realistic to begin with. That's going to affect, obviously, the rate of return. I mean, there's a number of issues, but the other underlying issue is I have no inclination to spend any more money on capital while they're screwing us for the use tax. And I don't want to be supplementing the city of Englewood's budget by us paying use tax on capital projects for the sewer plant.
I agree until the issue is resolved. That issue is resolved before you even begin to talk about the other.
Yep.
And the other may not be, still there's a risk that we need to decide whether we want to.
Yeah, I mean, the use tax first, but then the biogas is, and I'm in favor of reducing the flare as much as possible, but I think there's a number of choices of doing it, and I think it's pretty risky for us to be dumping $8 million on the project.
So I would like to comment that by not putting it in the budget, we don't want to send a message that we want to say no. We're just sending the message that it's too early to put it in the budget. And then maybe we have some wiggle room on this issue of the use tax. Is that a fair?
I think so. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah.
Does the management committee understand?
Yes, we understand, yes.
Yeah, it's a big number.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, it's a huge number.
Well, and it depends on Excel, and it depends on, futures in the energy field that maybe we don't understand.
I'm with North Korea.
Okay, so we're comfortable with that?
Yeah.
That ought to just be a space there. You can make the title called biogas, but don't put any money in there. Okay?
It's all about energy defense.
All right, and then, so the last item that we have to discuss in this bucket of stuff is storm drainage. And,
Actually,
hold on, go back.
sorry. I have a few things that I'd like to talk about with council on the sewer fund, just some updates. So you can see based on our ending cash balance, we're expected to be at about 17 million at the end of 18. Now this does include the $4 million related to the biogas. So if that is removed, then that would increase to about 21 million, just for your reference. And then on top of that, we have a $3 million rate stabilization requirement per our loan documents.
I'm sorry, would you start again? I missed
Sorry.
the first part of that.
Okay. So if you look at the ending cash balance that's projected for 2018 for the sewer fund, it's about $17 million. And that's on page 171, if you're looking for that. That does include the $4 million share of the biogas. So if that's not the direction the council wants to go, that would be increased to about $21 million at the end of 2018. On top of that, we're required to maintain a $3 million rate stabilization account per loan documents. So if you're looking at any cash, add another 3 to that. And then Inglewood does hold a 2-month reserve related to the operating expenditures for the sewer plant, so another $1.1 million. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the 17 million is there, but there are additional cash being held for various reasons. The other thing that I wanted to kind of give some information to council on is one of the requests was some potential early debt repayments of our loans that's outstanding currently. And the Colorado Water and Power Development Authority are the actual entity that issued the bonds. And we actually are a party to that, and so we have a loan agreement with the Colorado Water and Power Development Authority. That's how our debt was issued and funded.
Is that line 7910 you're talking about?
Yes. Yes, the debt payments. It's about $3.4 million a year that we're currently paying. I did contact them, and we did read loan agreements. And unfortunately, the bonds were refunded in 2013 so that we could realize about a $1.3 million savings. And when the city opted to do that and be a party to that, what it did is it extended the maturity of the current bonds that we have for another 10 years. So if we, short story is that we're not able to prepay or refund the bonds until 2022, which is only 3 years prior to the ending debt payment. If we were to prepay anything, we would still be subject to interest over the life of the loan. So I just wanted to relay that information back to council on that.
2022?
2022 is the first date that we could prepay or pay off some of those bonds. It's the call date.
But if we had money to prepay, but we don't want to prepay because, can we park it and get interest?
Well, we currently are. So the money that we have currently,
but
we are.
As in keeping that in a designated
cash account or something.
Yeah. So that it's associated with that.
You could do that. The cash is earning interest now that we're holding. So unless you're going to invest it in something in particular to maybe get a better rate, interest rates aren't that great right now, and I don't know where they're going to head. We're averaging about 1.5 or 1.6% in interest. I think the bigger issue is that we don't have the opportunity to prepay them because of the call date on the bonds themselves. We already talked about the rate study, and I apologize. I had intended to provide inside city and outside city by line item in this budget document, and we just weren't able to get to that point. But we will get there, and that definitely is a goal for the finance department and the public works department. And then we've already kind of talked about the biogas. So
When are we looking to do a first reading on this?
October 3rd.
You probably need to touch on this one issue that you and I have been talking about. You've got a 3-year plan versus on the noted here, the inside versus outside. I think we're recognizing that we're working off a rate study from 2007. And I think one of the trends here that we're seeing is that the inside city rate is probably too low to cover the true cost of the collection system. So we have been exploring some options here about what we might do here between now and, say, the rate study to bring this perhaps more into balance. And I realize that's kind of a little difficult proposition based on a 2007 study, but we're just seeing a trend, I think, that's caught our attention here. We may come back to you in the end of September, I guess, when we meet here again in a study session and touch on this issue here, if we can figure out some alternatives here to address that.
Both inside and outside.
Correct.
Preliminary, there's no rate adjustments for 2018.
Yeah, just in total across the fund, it looks like we do have sufficient funds to manage some of the larger capital pieces here that the plant has forecasted, plus some of the work that we want to do on the collection side. So generally speaking, no rate increase, at least for next year.
And it's a fee, so it's not Tabor related.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, it's a sewer enterprise, so it's not related to Tabor.
Do we ever think of unbundling the bill to say, here's the service and here's the...
That's Councilmember Clark's issue that he's raised, is trying to distinguish on the bill what you pay for treatment versus collection or whatever it might be. But yes, and that's a real typical approach for utility.
Right.
Yeah. So we're trying to work towards that.
We are.
In fact, we've even had some discussion with the software company
Yes.
to see if we can add that kind of definition to the bill.
There are people that don't understand.
Yes. Point taken.
And that would help. So much is collection.
Yes.
Of their bill.
Yes, I appreciate the point.
So Tiff, on the financials on the 59, 61, and 62, what is the difference between these ads? What are we talking about?
For sewer tap fees,
Yes.
so when sewer customers pull a tap to build a house or expand their current location, depending on if they're inside the city jurisdiction or outside the city, meaning one of our connecting districts, there's a different rate that they pay, and so we keep that separate.
All right, thank you.
I think that covers it. Got it?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, now on to
Sorry,
storm
just
drainage.
checking. The excitement of storm drainage. So, storm drainage is similar to some of the other areas we talked about. We need to take a look at where we need to go from a master planning perspective and what the infrastructure looks like in that area. That's our next target for asset management after the sewer area. What you see in the proposed budget is the third year of a 3-year rate increase that council has passed the last 2 years. The rate increase for this coming year would be $1 per month per single family home.
Per year.
Per year, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, the chart will come up in a second. So that $1 per year, and that would obviously be percentaged out in the commercial classes. That's basically where we're at. This pays for operational and capital in the stormwater area. This is an area we need to have a much more robust picture of where we are. I had decided to put in one other note. Next slide is that as we start to build out our capital plan, one of the bigger projects that's out there is some work related to the cemetery and drainage issues on Ridge and Prince and how that storm drain leaves our area and enters into the railroad area and some other areas. So that's a project that's out there in year 4 or 5. It still has yet to be, final design and that kind of thing. The last slide that I put in here.
Windermere and Hinsdale, right? And Windermere and Hinsdale.
Yes. So this last slide I wanted to put up for your own information. This is a comparison of Littleton's stormwater utility rates compared to peers in the state. On a monthly basis, this is the average single-family home rate. Including this $1 a year increase, it's $2.75. And I really looked hard to find another jurisdiction that had a lower rate, and the only ones I could find were ones that had it in the general fund and it didn't charge a separate rate.
So you're saying we're doing a good job?
Very
efficient.
Very efficient. So this is for your information. As we move forward to take a look at the robustness of information we have about our assets out there and where we're ready to go, I just wanted to put this data out there as a reference point for your consideration in the future.
Keith, on that last point though, we're also part of urban drainage and flood control district,
which collects its own.
Which collects its own, and to make the comparisons better, you might want to look at
I can tell you right now, even if I add in all of urban drainage's fees, Littleton is still at the bottom of the roost.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue where the placement is, but you may want to have that to just...
let's do a clarification on that too as a side note, is that sometimes there's a misconception, just like we were talking about in the sewer utility bill. Urban drainage is basically responsible for large regional projects. And we are going to be talking to you about one here in the very near future related to probably an emergency expenditure that we're going to need to have with urban drainage. And we partner with them as a share to their projects. But we also have a whole host of facilities that are our own that we've accepted over time as development has occurred over the last 140 years in this community. And so I totally agree with you, and I think a lot of times the public's not clear on where that differentiation lies. That's part of, I think, our ability to have that data and then combine that with the knowledge so that both our community and our decision makers together can understand what we're providing and what our needs are as we go forward.
Well, and urban drainage has been a good partner along
Absolutely.
the river and in other areas of contributing, if not also project management responsibilities being kind of in-kind components.
And they do maintenance. And Denver takes their stormwater fees and uses it for sidewalks and streets.
But you have to remember too, though, that curb and gutter is there for your stormwater system.
Yep.
And that's, people often forget that the components you see in a roadway aren't necessarily just there for the road. The curb and gutter is there for drainage, for example. And so that's part of the whole equation of understanding what your infrastructure does. So.
One last piece, I just want to emphasize this, and we've talked about this in the last couple of years. For the storm drainage utility, remember, we don't have an inventory. So we cannot tell you all of the assets we have in the ground. So the fact we don't have an inventory, we certainly don't have any kind of condition assessment. And that played out dramatically here a couple of years ago in that failure in Broadway. And so, again, it's just emphasizing we've got some work to do in the storm drainage utility.
And we're looking in all of these areas. As a staff, we're excited about the opportunity to build out that information and that platform so that we can share that information and that data with you and with the community, so you have a true picture of what you own and the condition it's in and the risk that we have as a community and where we need to think about going as a community. And that's from a staff perspective where we're excited to take this in the future for decision making in this community.
So I have a question on our challenge with streets and roads, and we've been talking about that. But you just commented on something I want to make sure I understood. And I agree, the curb and gutter is part of the stormwater. Are we properly interpreting how we can use funds to get the best bang for the buck for our street repair / curb and gutter to take part of it out of the storm?
That's a great question, and that's part of what we need to explore as we go forward in understanding our assets in these areas. Like, for example, most of these other jurisdictions, their street sweeper replacements would be coming out of their stormwater utility. Because the reason you're street sweeping is for water quality and drainage and water quality, so that you're clean. That stuff that you're getting off the roads is to keep it from going into your storm drains untreated and downstream to the river.
I thought it was to keep the streets from looking crabby.
That too. So
That's a side benefit.
that's right. So really, that's part of the way we look at it. And so I can tell you with assurance that the vast majority of these utilities that you see up here, something like a street sweeper, is being paid for primarily out of the stormwater utility. So part of our task here is to understand as we get our hands around what that is, what we own, and what it is how do we appropriately put things in the appropriate fund along the way. And one of the things that to me is important as we try and build government that's transparent to our community and to our citizens is they should be able to understand. If they get a bill for stormwater, they should be able to understand what it is and what goes into that and the components that are tied to it. Likewise for sewer and likewise for other areas. And so it's important for us to build that out so that we do have that level of transparency. If you remember 30, 40 years ago, everything was in a general fund, regardless of what it was. And we've moved away from that for a variety of reasons. And those are all good to provide greater transparency of how we're using citizens' dollars, whether it's tax or utility or fees, to deliver services in their community.
So we've been using block grant money up in the northeast neighborhood for years to do sidewalks. And we're doing it for, as Councilmember Cole says, for curb appeal as well as safety and bringing it up to ADA standards and et cetera. Well, why don't we use that for something else? We use stormwater, which we got an excess of in the fund to do the sidewalk. You know what I'm saying? We got to figure out a way to get back around so there's more money for streets and roads between the concrete.
We absolutely believe that part of the goal of this process of determining our assets and doing that and understanding what it takes to take care of them will allow us to better align costs with where they should be. And that's part of one of the key outcomes of this effort that we're going forward with. And so that you can direct the money in other areas where you want to go. And that's part of building out this platform of information to help us be better decision makers, to help us be clear about where money's being spent and how services are being delivered in the community.
So let me make sure I'm clear. I was told when I ran for council there'd be no math. But
boy, were you snookers.
At $275 a month, that's $33 a year per house.
Right.
That's the average.
That's what your single families
Per
are
residential.
paying. That's correct. Per
average
residential
house.
structure.
And then commercial is more.
Right. Scale.
So if we're hearing this right, I mean, and what do we collect for stormwater? Do you know what the total amount is?
Tiffany can do that. To give you a comparison, the rate structure we have here is a flat rate structure. The vast majority of utilities have moved to a model over the last decade, which takes a look at your stormwater fee. There's a base rate, and then you have a factor on that based on the pervious versus impervious impacts on your particular property. The residential tends to stay at a flat rate, but scaled by lot size, but then other commercial interests. And we just started to add that data to our GIS layer in the last month. So we'll be able to start to look at models of rate structures that really look at how much pervious versus impervious land you have on your particular parcel and how that plays into your contribution to the system.
2018 is about $800,000.
800,000. So, I mean, we could look at, I don't know what the numbers pan out to because of the math equation, but I mean, is somebody willing to pay another $5 more a year and get their street paved? That's
get their
sidewalks done. That's kind of, we're talking about.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may though, I think that strategy is, we certainly welcome that kind of discussion, but just remember, we don't know all the assets in the ground.
That's understood.
Yeah.
It's just an approach.
Yes, correct, there's definitely an approach, and Keith's right, lots of cities do that. They look to storm drainage to pay for curb and gutter types of improvements.
And we're, part of this is, we're also spending time talking, as we come into later in the year and talk about different revenue models, we have some discussions we want to bring forward related to specific models related to street maintenance and some things like that that have been used throughout the state of Colorado already. So.
Because, I mean, you throw the numbers out you want, but if you wanted to do a big hit on street repair, you could change the fees for a year or two, or several, a 5-year expiration, sunset it, pay off a bond, you could do a lot of street repair.
There's a community nearby that just did that. Sheridan decided $33 million over 4 years to redo everything.
And how they finance it?
And with a bond, and they did it. It was originally a 7-year plan, and they delivered it in 4.
And so they sunset a fee increase?
I believe so, yes.
No, they passed a tax increase.
A tax increase with a sunset on it.
Well,
Yep,
and
with a
this is,
sunset.
just getting back to Adams County is one of the examples. The interesting thing in Adams County is Commerce City passed a 1% sales tax increase over a 10-year period with projects just focused on streets. And so you have one jurisdiction, essentially they didn't set up their own regional transportation authority. They made it at a city level, but also, they're doing that, so their appetite for a statewide solution to get money back to local jurisdictions is less to non-existent.
Okay, Any more questions? This moves us to community development. And so just looking at our time, we got 22 minutes before 9, and the agreement that city manager and I worked out here is we were going to try to leave at 9. We feel like, unfortunately, if there's somebody who doesn't get to speak on staff that didn't want to be here tomorrow night, I don't know, I guess they suffer, but a lot of the discussion that we had for that extra hour actually was going to be tomorrow night. So we feel comfortable that we won't shortcut the important discussion tomorrow night, because we have a lot of it tonight. But we are going to inconvenience some staff if we do community development.
Are we talking about inconveniencing Tim?
Yeah, well, maybe they want to vote to see who gets the inconvenience, but community development is the next one up, then library and museum.
They might be able to barter over there in their own corner too.
So, I don't know that we can ask all that.
I'm more than willing to try. It's up to you.
Okay, community development, you ready? Okay. Tim, you were going to be here anyway, right?
Yeah, you called it, I can do it, I can do it.
We weren't asking, actually.
My mistake.
So moving along, this brings us up to community development, and there is a policy question number 8 that we'll be discussing before we end policy 9.
So, 2 things, and I'll try to be quick. First, I want to make sure you understand, Councilmember Belkis, that we do value customer service, and so yes, the zoning code does allow you to substitute bike parking for vehicle parking, and most likely that's in the Brentbury, but I'll fill out the details for you.
So it's easier to get 27 bikes versus 27 cars? Is that?
No. 3 bikes per parking space, and you can only use it up to 10% of your overall vehicle load.
So why would they have done that, though?
I'm sorry?
Why did they did they choose the 27?
Yes, it's up to them.
So it's
It's their choice. I assume because they're on the river and it's great access, and they probably are getting a...
No, up on Broadway and Littleton Boulevard.
Oh, Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, yeah.
Probably because
So-
they're constrained with parking.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Yes.
So they increased bike.
Yes, that's an option anywhere if you voluntarily submit that request.
Thank you.
So you can ride to the store to pick up your milk.
Yeah.
Jerry's going to sell these over like get a twin.
Thank you, Council, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So I have mine in first because I added a couple more details around the budget highlights. So if you'll bear with me, we're going to do budget highlights and then the 2 policy questions. And briefly before that, I do want to give you some context that I think will help with the discussion. Community development is busy, and we are at maximum capacity, and as you can tell up here on the screen, building construction valuation, so that's overall value of construction in Littleton in the last 6 years has increased 158%. A couple other stats to help make that understandable. Planning applications have increased in that same time frame, 233%, and building inspections have increased 103% again in that same time frame. And those really help capture both the workload that we have as well as the complexity of the applications that are being submitted and that are being built.
Jocelyn?
Yes.
Do you mean that the 80 million versus the 207 is applications submitted?
No, yes, on applications submitted, yes. Yep. The value, the total value.
Total
of those,
value.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And both showing workload and the complexity. We anticipate that type of work or complexity will happen as we really start to look towards more infill and redevelopment around the city. Code enforcement too is increasing complexity as we handle more marijuana cultivation, meth contamination, hoarding, and unsafe buildings, as well as neighborhood resources and mediation. They not only help with court referrals, but we're seeing a lot more and getting into tough land use disputes, HOA disputes, and as well as housing issues. So quickly in the last 2 years, what have we been doing? We've improved transparency with the development activity list, really trying to get the word out there and let people know what is actually happening in our city, as well as adding that public notice to public hearings. We've improved the development review process and really tried to bring in both engineering and fire and all the review agencies to really make sure that that's an efficient but thorough process. And then the last thing, we've really done a lot of restructuring and reorganization within the department. Our new building officials started last week, and we have really good staff. And the only way I could explain it is looking at like Jim Collins, the Good to Great. I firmly believe we're getting the right staff in the right places on the bus. So I feel really good. We've made some really good progress, I believe. And some good improvements, but it's still busy and we're still at capacity. So our budget highlights this evening, as well as policy questions, are as an ask and as an update to managing that workload and capacity. So this one, the first budget highlight, this one wasn't in the packet, but I just wanted to make sure to put it up here because it is important, and it's about professional services for on the planning side. The line item is on page 108. That's the total of 95. It is reduced over last year, but it is still a big number, and we do need this. We're asking for it to help with current planning. We have a potential metro district formation happening, so we need the technical expertise to help us review that, as well as the service plan financials, historic preservation, architectural review. And this also includes the allocation for the next corridor plan. We estimate that to be about $75,000, and that was per the council priority number 5, if you recall, where we were talking about Bellevue Corridor. We're undertaking that this fall, will be done next spring, and we had put in there that the next thing is we would like to be able to come back and then figure out what's the next corridor that you want us to take on. So that's an allocated amount. It's not a done deal.
Do you see Metro District reforming or new one forming?
New one, yep. And tomorrow we do anticipate to have an increase, or excuse me, a discussion around a request that we have to increase planning fee revenues. So that's that one. The second one, and this is an expansion of what was in in your packet. We have seen a big increase in building permit inspections, and this one is a request for professional services for building services, if you will. And it's an increase of $100,000 over last year. Primarily, the request increase is for third-party roof inspections. Revenue from roof permits will offset this increase. And other services funded out of this line item would be the elevator inspection that we contract for, as well as plan review and inspection contracted services. That's that one.
So let's go to policy question 8, just to make sure we have clarity from council.
Yes.
Does council have any questions about that request, and are you comfortable moving forward?
Yes. I have one question, hopefully brief. This sounds great, because I had a question for Jocelyn today, and she said a lot of this has actually been happening manually, so, it's a great upgrade, it should save a lot. Is there a way that integrates also into Public Works? It sounds like a lot of the things
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. So really the Track It 9 would be the ability to continue. We use it right now. Public Works uses it. Fire uses it. The current version we have, upgrading this version will make that more efficient, as well as it will allow our outside review agencies to also electronically upload their comments, because most of that is all done digitally. So it really provides some great efficiencies, we believe, and with the workload and the capacity issues we have, it would be a phenomenal resource.
So is it correct to say, and maybe this is for Mr. Price, that this fully integrates all the departments that are trying to track this kind of activity? Is that okay? Thank you.
And finance uses this with sewer tap fees as well.
Okay, thank you.
I guess
So
that's part of the
my
message
question
there,
was,
right.
since you're at the hilt anyway already, are you going to be able to handle the upgrade? Some upgrades are more painless than others.
I think it will be a challenge, but I think we all recognize the opportunity that this provides for workload and efficiency. So we're really excited about it, but we do recognize it'll.
So the benefit's worth the pain.
Yeah, and if I may, we had a fair amount of internal discussion about this, and we're just all, as staff, convinced that we really must move this direction. The efficiencies of this thing is just far beyond where we're at today, and it's just, from a workload perspective, I think it'll be a big hit for us.
And the question that I have is, one with the new building official as well, is I I know that there's been some issues over the past year with regard reliability of inspection scheduling around permits. So between having a building official and the software tracking, that's going to improve.
I think having the building official, the software tracking, the third-party roof inspections, and then that's a great segue into policy question number 9. This request is we've had 2 years ago, the request was a 2-year term building inspector, just because we weren't exactly sure how busy we were going to get. Well, we've continued to maintain that, and we've found that 4 permanent inspectors really is the right mix that we need to maintain our existing capacity. So with all those, yes.
Thank you.
So that brings us to policy question number 9, the council. Are comfortable moving that forward?
Did we get agreement on 8?
Yeah, got agreement on 8.
Okay. I'm fine with 9.
Agreement on 9. You didn't know you agreed on 8, but you did.
I was all over it. No problem with 8.
It was like you were at the auction and you nodded your head.
Trying to make it
It's the shine.
So questions, Jocelyn, do you have anything else?
I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Good job.
What's the winning lotto number?
Oh, yes, good question. I don't know. 22's in there somewhere.
Good job, Johnson.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Tim to come up with Library Museum.
All right.
Because he told me last night that he could fill in if we wanted to for 10 minutes. He said, 10 minutes, that's all it'll take. 10 minutes. 5.
All right. Challenge on.
Depending on the questions.
The Chiefs just started their stopwatch.
All right, Chip's got it. All right.
Evening, Council. I do have a pretty quick presentation for you this evening. My asks again come out of Conservation Trust Fund money, so it's money that my department is able to leverage towards some of the capital projects. We have 3 projects included this year. I'd be happy to go into detail if you want to on any of them. I know they're in your packet, so if you have any questions about any of those, I'd be happy to answer those.
Can you just review and you're going to review the ones you're going to present? Let's go ahead and present.
Okay, they're green. The first one is the boiler replacement at the library, $150,000. Approaching 40 years old, I think, is a little optimistic. I thought the last date I heard on it was 1965. So either way, it's not exactly performing optimally. If you've been in the library, particularly during the winter months, we have real circulation issues. This won't address all of them because there are a number of systems that are kind of cobbled together over the years through the remodels, but it certainly should improve circulation and heating efficiency. It's also going to be good for energy efficiency. So our goal would be to significantly improve the visitor performance and also staff spaces, which can tend to be either really cold or really warm depending on where you are in the building. So that's number 1. The second one, library window replacement. This also is aiming at energy efficiency. You might recall the north-facing windows are the ones that get a lot of our sunlight, and this will be a complete replacement of those. I think it's 3 major panes there. That's $26,500. And then the final one is replacing some of the historic roof buildings, or historic building roofs at the museum. This is 7 of our buildings on the 2 living history farms. They've gone about 15 or 20 years with the current shake shingles, and we're starting to notice some leaking problems. So this is a little bit proactive, but we see it as something that definitely would be possible damage for artifacts and interfere with programming in several locations. So we think these are good investments. Councilmember Hopping reached out to me this morning to talk about a little bit about the type of shake shingles that we're using. We do have to go with a thinner one than what would be sort of the optimal level because of historical accuracy. So it doesn't have quite as long a life, but they are good for about 15 or 20 years. So we're pretty close to the end of life on all of those.
And how's the storage facility?
The gray elephant.
Good question. Yeah, the collections facility, we've been able to do some things with some relocation of items, reallocation of space, if you will. So we're holding pretty steady somewhere in the low 90s, I would say, for percentage of occupancy. So we've been able to trim that down a few percentage points in the last few years. We still are being very careful in what we collect, particularly in areas where we're really dense and are thin on storage space. But I mean, our job is to collect contemporaneously. So history was yesterday. So we are continuing to collect. We're just doing it in a very targeted fashion.
I thought it was this morning.
History is what we had for dinner tonight. So. Yeah, so we're trying to be very judicial in our approach, but so far we've been able to hold the line.
So policy question number 10 was using the Conservation Trust funds for those 3 capital improvement areas that Tim mentioned. Are there any issues?
Let's go for it.
Thank you.
I suppose.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to tell us?
I've got one budget highlight. Flip over to that one. Oh, sorry, thanks. So we are working with Public Works. I know one of the questions has been impact fees. The library and museum each have an impact fee dedicated to them. We're limited in what we can use those impact fees for. It has to be either capital expansion caused by growth or collections development caused by growth. So we are looking at a project, and the city manager particularly asked us to look into this one to improve the connectivity between the library and museum. So that would include sidewalks, pedestrian pathways through the park, lighting in the park, and probably some sort of a flashing crossers that we have on the same areas. And the goal would be really not only to improve the walking experience for our pedestrians going between the 2 facilities, but also to utilize each other's parking lots in a more efficient manner. So we don't see any real way we can expand the library parking lot, which is the one that is particularly an issue. But because of all the evening programs we have there when the museum is closed, if we had a better connectivity between the 2 buildings, we'd be able to use that more heavily. So
Not only the connectivity between the buildings, but then also thematic presentations that might be able to connect the 2.
yeah, good point. Yeah, so it's a good opportunity. So Mark and Steve and Randy and I have looked at it. I haven't had a chance to walk it with Keith yet, but I think he's been over and looked at it independently. Yeah, he's nodding. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in 2018 to bring back to you.
So we're looking also at the sidewalk from the library west to that street.
Yes,
because
ma'am.
that gets kind of exciting.
Yes, you're exactly right.
Breaking up of the sidewalk.
Yeah, there are some real issues with all the pathways through there, and the lighting goes hand in hand with that. So yeah, we'll be looking at all of those. Also, you will notice on the west side of Gallup, the sidewalks along the park much thinner. They don't meet ADA requirements, so they certainly don't match up with the sidewalks that we have on the east side, on the museum side of the road. So that's all kind of part and parcel of this.
And we time that work after the window replacement on the library?
I don't know what the time would be. I would guess it probably would be, since we aren't really very deep into that. I think Alan is pretty much ready to go on the window replacement. Keith is nodding again. Yes, thank you, Keith. So I think that one's probably good to go right after January, which is probably wait until the weather's a little better. But the budget will be ready in January. So when the first warm rays come through, that's when we'll be looking at it.
If we bought the windows, I wonder if these 2 hurricanes, what that does to window prices.
Well, maybe they'll just float up to us.
Maybe we can cut some down to size.
Very cruel.
Mayor, if I could have just one more minute, I would give you, after a couple nights of kind of dour numbers, I'd give you some numbers I think look actually pretty good. As you might recall from last year, the museum set a new attendance record with about 155,000 people. This year through August, we're running 11,000 ahead of that pace from last year, so about 7% up. Library's up about 3% with our head count use. Since November of last year, and I'm sure the timing is coincidental, the Immigrant Resource Center has been up 75% with contacts from potential clients. And right now, the Aging Well Resource Center is running about 300% above where our numbers were last year. So, so good things are happening in both those buildings.
That is exciting. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
Well, I think that's about it. I want to refresh your memory that open space and citywide are the 2 topics that we have not discussed tonight. We'll move those tomorrow night. And I just want to comment, because I was going through the budget myself. On the open space part, although there's only one policy question, there's a lot of issues in that part of budget that I think we're going to want to discuss, and I think that you want to be ready to do that one.
Yep.
And also, we did not get to those entities that we want to provide assistance to with our small grants.
Yes.
Now, do we have a list?
And so,
Yes.
tell me about that. Where is that list?
Yes, we have Kelly has a list, and the intent was to share that with you. And the procedure we used last year was you made decisions here, and we kept track of that, quite honestly, up on, well, there it is, up on a spreadsheet. So that was the process we used last year. I gotta be honest with you, I'd like to talk about a little bit of a different process for next year. But in the interest of time, this is what we had anticipated here for council for this time. We could do it this evening, or again, as the mayor was suggesting, we could certainly do that tomorrow night.
Why don't you print that to us so we can look at it?
You bet.
Yeah,
Would
I
you
think
like
that's
to
a good
have-
idea.
Yeah, so we can,
We have a one-page application for each of the applicants. These were due at the end of June.
I think if we send this this
Would you like the one-page application from each agency as well?
yeah,
Yes,
that'd be
We
great.
tried to simplify it, so we can have that for you.
Yeah, we'll send them electronically tomorrow morning, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then
do
we
that.
can certainly make hard copies for you if you'd like that.
Sure.
For the meeting, yeah.
Yeah, at least for the meeting. Would that be satisfactory?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll be working tomorrow night on several different things. Thank you. I think we're done.
Okay.